fine. So should be, this will probably be the last stream on this project, I think. I might be wrong. I could be wrong. But we're really close. So here's what we need to do today. We need to detail the Marines a little bit. Just pick out their pouches and their weapons and maybe their eyes, that kind of thing. I want to finish up the pink highlights on these magenta bits. And we're not going to do that. So just general detail. So like, essentially I want to do eyes and I want to do a pink highlight and I want to do the Marines. And that's really it. Then just bevel and glow on the flock. I do have to do something with these zoanthrope heads to match the client's work. It looks like he just kind of highlighted it with like a yellow color. So I think a simple solution is just going to be to dry brush up and then just apply a little bit of, I don't know, wash or something. Not sure. But as it is right now, I don't really know what that is. It's just a little bit yellow, I guess. All right. So to be conscientious of time, I want to make sure that stuff dries. So I guess the first thing to do is to throw down this pink, then detail the Marines. While that's drying, highlight the pink. While that's drying, wash the Marines. Yeah, so I'm going to lay this down. I also want to lay down an orange color in their eyes because I want to come back in and highlight that later. I also need to look up what color Blood Angel eyes are.
Let me direct it, so. I kept waiting for somebody to say no, but they didn't. They told me later we were terrified when you said you wanted to direct it. We thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? But they let me do it.
Did you direct every episode, or did you direct the...
No, I directed the pilot.
Yeah, which is incredible. For them to take that risk, but at the same time, they had that trust, and it really paid off. I always think, I'll tell you, 6 Feet Under had such an impact on me as a person, as a writer. I watched it during college and it on DVD because we didn't have cable in my house at all growing up. And then finally, when I got to college, I put some of that student money towards renting them on DVDs. So I'd go home during Christmas vacation and feel the conflict of my own family, and then instead go into the 6 Feet Under family. And what it does so beautifully is that you see yourself and your own pain, the conversations you aren't even having out loud with your family or with yourself yet, and then you see them on screen. And I think that's what 6 Feet Under did for so many people. Just created this catharsis that we just all needed to see, and so much unspoken, and it's just so beautiful. I know we're here to talk about so many things, but it's just such yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Big Magic really touched you, and that came from you, and it just really it's just I think anyway. How beautiful.
No, it was a really wonderful experience, and I worked with wonderful writers and learned so much from them. And the cast was amazing, and everything about that was charmed. It felt.
How do you feel what inspired you in the beginning to become a writer? And
I was a really voracious reader growing up, and I remember stories or like writing books, little books, of course, notebook paper that I would staple together. I was also I watched a lot of television and I loved movies. So then, and I found myself in high school, I would write all the skits for the pep rallies, or we would do these promotional skits for selling the student newspaper, and I was always the guy who wrote those. And then when I went to college, I majored in theater, and I wanted to be an actor because, everybody, I wanted that immediate ego gratification. I wanted people to watch me and approve of me and love me. Strangers who didn't know me. I ended up starting to write sketch comedy for myself and other friends who were not getting cast in big main stage shows at the School of Theater. And so we did these shows in the basement. It was right around the time that Saturday Night Live premiered. And so we wrote and performed in these sketch comedy shows, and there were, people came, and it was a packed house, and even though it was like a really in the basement, and I guess that started me. I started writing sketch comedy, and then I moved on to one acts, and then eventually I wrote a full-length play, and it became clear to me, even though including the time I lived in New York, I was still trying to be an actor in this stuff, but eventually I realized that I was a better writer than an actor, and that I had more to offer as a writer than I did as an actor. So I just started really focusing on the writing at that point.
What were some of those books that influenced you, and writers and playwrights that kept you going, that you feel have the biggest influence on your work?
In terms of playwrights, Tennessee Williams was a big one. I grew up in the South. I'm I completely understood that, and that sort of romanticized Southern Gothic weirdness that he was such a master at. I also remember, as for books, I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books that were popular at the time, like bestsellers, like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and The Godfather. And I probably shouldn't have been reading those books as young as I was, but my parents didn't really pay too much attention, so I got away with it. And then, I watched a lot of television, watched a lot of movies. Certainly, the films of Robert Altman, Nashville, Thieves Like Us, California Split, The Long Goodbye, McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Those were all very influential to me in those formative years.
So moving on to Uncle Frank, what was your intention in coming to writing this story?
30 years ago, I was living in New York City, and I went home to Marietta to come out of the closet to my mother. And when I did, she said, "Well, I blame your father for this because I think he was that way too." I will never know if that's true or not because he was already dead at the time. And then the next day we were driving around North Georgia, and we drove past a lake, and she very nonchalantly said, "Oh, that's where Sam Lassiter drowned." And I said, "Sam, who's Sam Lassiter?" And she said, "He was a real good friend of your daddy's." And then I found out that my dad, as a very young man, barely 20 years old, he was working as part of the New Deal with the CCC camps in North Georgia, that he accompanied Sam's body on a train back to their hometown of Asheville, North Carolina. And so something in my brain just sort of went, wait a minute, what if this was true? What if what my mom said was true? What if there was this relationship with this other boy who died? What might that story have been? And it percolated in my head for 25 years. And then I sat down to write a script, and Uncle Frank is what came out. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's kind of like an imagined history of a possible version of my dad that may have existed. You know what I mean? But I think in a way, I do know that, my father always, he was a kind and loving man, but he was distant. And I always got the sense that there was some secret tragedy that he was carrying. And so I guess in a way, I never sit down to write something and go, what is it I want to accomplish with this? It always becomes clear to me after the fact, oh, I guess that's what I wanted to do at that moment. I think it was just a way to sort of imagine a history for him that, for this version of my father, which may have existed or not, that had some sort of redemption at the end, you know what I mean, and allowed him to be who he truly was. I guess that's what I wanted.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's what movies allow us to find this aspiration and peace that we could hope for, the best, Yeah. In our lives, yeah. I'm curious just curious about the Daddy Mac, who is more stern and very kind of patriarchal figure, who was cold and had, hate in his heart, and it was very homophobic. Like, if that had been in your father too, or it had been.
Not really. I think the Daddy Mac character is, for me, just a human version of all of that fear and religious weirdness that surrounds people's reactions to homosexuality. Because my own grandfather, I remember him as being kind of a, funny old guy, and nobody ever talked about homosexuality or mentioned it in my family, and I think that's, part of the message I got was it's unmentionable, So Daddy Mac is none of the characters are based on any particular people in my family, although certainly that world and that kind of family is certainly very, very familiar to me. But Daddy Mac, I think more than anything, is just representative of the power and the prevalence of fear and how it manifests itself as hatred.
But it's interesting at this time too, because of this rising strongman type of character that we're seeing in our society. And I'll just be totally transparent. The kind of violence that I saw in the opening scene, where you have one of your protagonists, Beth, who's Frank's niece, seeing her father's anger, or Daddy Mac's anger around children. My dad's from Kansas. My uncle, a younger brother who grew up with him, is homosexual and grew up around that time, born in the 1950s. And we have my grandfather is a veteran, World War II veteran, and is very, in Kansas, very repressed, very you didn't talk about it, you had to escape that. And so I think a lot of what in seeing this movie is about finding that you have to find your place, but also escape for a little bit to those places where you are accepted, part of this road film trip. But I'm curious about Beth's character too, you have who played by Sophia Lillis, like so lovely, so talented,
so amazing.
So amazing.
Those eyes, my God.
They express so much. I know she in it, and I saw her in
Sharp Objects.
I didn't see her in Sharp. I saw her in Everything's Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. I'm not okay with this.
I'm not okay with it. Yes. But using her sort of but having her sort of as like how we see Uncle Frank. What inspired that, or what was your intention with that relationship? Or what were you, now that you've written it, do you have an intention with that relationship? Or
well, you know what? I think a lot of people. A question I get asked a lot is, "Did you have an Uncle Frank?" And I didn't. I wish I had. So I think maybe. I did come of age in the 70s. I was a sophomore in high school in 1973. I think maybe that was sort of wish fulfillment for me. Like, I wish I had an Uncle Frank, so I was putting myself in the role of Beth. And also, one of my favorite movies is To Kill a Mockingbird, and one of my favorite books too. And I love a lot of people when we first started shopping the script around. They would say, "Well, is it Beth's movie or is it Frank's movie?" And I'm like, "Well, is To Kill a Mockingbird Scout's movie or is it Atticus's movie?" And so I sort of used that power dynamic of the young girl observing a sort of father, uncle-ish type figure who is, dealing with some really big issues. And I guess, I hope I'm answering your question. I guess Sophia it just always started, my first draft started out with her and her sort of us seeing the movie through her eyes. So I guess it's, I wanted us to see, before we saw Frank at his absolute worst, I wanted to see him sort of as this romanticized figure of somebody who would want to be like him. And so I guess that's where Beth came from.
I also see it too as like, if you're Beth, and also I wondered if you were an Uncle Frank. Like, also now in this film, like, it acts like an Uncle Frank for a lot of people nowadays, too.
Yeah, I can see that. I didn't really have anybody who I felt like I was a mentor towards, or I would have liked to have an Uncle Frank, and I would have liked to have been an Uncle Frank, but it just wasn't in the cards for me either way.
I think you're an Uncle Frank in many ways now. Like, I think as a filmmaker with a big influence. And
well, thank you for saying that.
No, I think there's definitely a truth to it. And throughout your work actually, I want to ask you.
Jesus fucking Christ! I can't deal with her. She's just too much. You're too much, sweetie. I don't know.
Since you, from directing Cowlhead to
goes, it's really successful and as graceful as it can be without it feeling contrived or pretentious. So in a lot of ways, it's still the same as when I was doing those sketch comedy shows. It's still the same basic thing of bringing these imaginary stories to life in a way that feels real and interesting and emotionally engaging.
Throughout your work, I find that there's a lot of themes of identity, mental illness, intergenerational family trauma, and also a lot of like intersection of different races, which I think is beautiful. I'm just curious about, like, are these your intentional approaches, or like if like there's something that you want to say?
I need to do a thin down
like,
white
if there's a core
first.
thing that you want to say in everything you create, like what's your approach?
I think if I had to say what my work is about, I would say it's about the challenges of being an authentic person in an increasingly inauthentic world. And ultimately, everything stems from that. At least in terms of the stories that appeal to me. And I mean, it's interesting because, you know, being, you know, like a white guy, and for the longest time, you know, everything that I wrote was mostly about white people. But I have, you know, I mean, I'm an aware person, and I see the world that we're living in, and also I feel like, you know, I live with Americans from a different culture, and it's been really eye-opening and enriching to me to have that experience. And I don't know how I got on this tangent, but I certainly feel like the more that I can make my work as inclusive of so many different experiences as possible, it only makes the work better, and it only makes the work more accessible. And I don't want to be somebody who writes the same thing over and over and over and over again. So it is something I think about. You know, one of the reasons the character Wally is from Saudi Arabia and is a Muslim is because I felt like Frank is running from himself and his past. He's going to end up with somebody as different from him as possible, who comes from a world that's as different from his as possible. And I think Wally makes the movie so much more interesting. You know what I mean? And is able to provide this completely unexpected, and because you think, Muslim, how could he be so open and so, because we're conditioned to believe, you know, terrorist, whatever. So those are things that are important to me. I do try to figure out a way to do it, not just for the sake of doing it, not just to click off some of the correct boxes, but to just widen the world a little bit and make it a little more interesting and a little less homogenous.
I think that's really felt, you know, as a person, I'm, you know, from a mixed race family and being a mixed race person, I will say it's like, it doesn't feel like a check mark. It feels like you are writing a whole authentic person, you know, and I suspected that your partner may be Arabic, and you know, after also I have a feeling, I didn't want to presume. But the love of the whole character is there. So I have a question from my good friend Ashley Ball, who actually is from Georgia too, and she goes by AB too. And she asked me, she says, Alan creates some of the most dimensional, realistic, and arguably complex characters portrayed in film and television. The emotional messiness humanizes them in a way that is endearing and relatable while provoking questions within ourselves as an audience. How do you approach character work, especially in the context of plot, theme, concept, or story? Now, I know we've kind of gone through some of it, but I just wanted to shout out my friend, also from Georgia, also baby, who is also a big fan of hers.
Well, please thank her for such lovely, kind words. For me, character is the starting point. And I've always been fascinated by psychology. I mean, for a while in college, I was like, maybe I should be a psych major. And I took a lot of psych classes. I just am fascinated by human behavior and growing up in a family with some very complex, psychologically complex people, myself being one of them, I just I try to. A lot of people see characters as figures on a chessboard to move around to facilitate the plot. And I remember I had a meeting when I first came to Hollywood. I had a meeting and they pitched me this idea about Hugh Grant is a butler and Winona Ryder is the heiress, and they fall in love. And I was like, okay, but first of all, My Man Godfrey, that's basically that movie. And second of all, what are the characters? And they were like, Hugh Grant and Winona Ryder. And I was like, well, no, they're the actors, but what are the characters? And they went, Hugh Grant and Winona Ryder. And for me, it's always, people always say, do you have actors in mind when you write something? And I don't, because I feel like the characters are real enough on their own. And the minute I put an actor's face on them or something, it starts to limit what the character can be. So I feel like I've sort of painted myself into a corner with this answer, and I don't really know if I'm answering your question. But I am fascinated by people whose behavior surprises me, and by understanding why they behave and knowing why they behave the way they do. Because it usually, if it's characters you would characterize as villains or whatever, usually it comes from a place of pain, and that's interesting to me. I'm not interested in the people who get it right all the time, because they make me feel really inadequate. So even fictional characters who get it right all the time, it's like, no. I want to see the struggle, because the struggle is what we share, and the struggle is what makes us human.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to. One more question. I've read that your Buddhism practice has a big impact on you. Is that something that I made up?
No, I mean I read books about Buddhism and I try to meditate every day. I feel like of all the spiritual disciplines that I've been exposed to in my life, it's the one that makes the most sense. What I love about it is that it's the lack of judgment and the idea that experience, the idea that you don't have to be perfect, and that to feel the need to be perfect is a kind of narcissism. And I think one way that it impacts my work is it hopefully makes me less judgmental of people in general, but I do feel like I become less judgmental of characters and what they do. For example, like the Aaron Eckhart character in Towelhead. What he does is inexcusable, but I feel like there is compassion for him, both in me as the writer of the story and Alicia Arian, who wrote the novel that is based on both in her. It in no way absolves him of the terrible, terrible choice that he makes. But I think one of the reasons that movie didn't really click for a lot of people is because the only way that we can see that story of an older man and a younger woman is by casting them as he's the monster, she's the victim. And yes, those are true, but there's a lot more going on. And one of the reasons I responded to the book as much as I did is it told the story from her point of view that didn't make her a complete victim and also have her end up totally ruined by the experience. Because it's a very common experience for women. So I guess the Buddhism is a way of I just try to practice compassion and hopefully I practice it in my work as well.
It feels like you don't judge your characters that way too. It's also you allow them to behave how they would as humans. like flawed and doing like those real things happen, you know, and we're humans. So I also like appreciate that because I don't believe in cancel culture. You know, I really think cancel culture. I think like we do have to call people out, hold them accountable, but we also have to give room for growth. And what does that actually look like, you know, to see change and growth? Like, but we have to see the sins. Everybody has sins, you know. So
Absolutely.
See them. So I have usually end this with a rapid fire. Just quick 3 questions round to ask you. Really quickly, what are you watching during the pandemic?
Right now I'm watching a Dutch show called Undercover, which is really, really interesting and fun and weird. And I'm looking forward to The Crown. I'm looking forward to the new season of The Crown. And I also saw the first episode of Lovecraft Country, and I really liked that. And I'm looking forward to seeing that as well.
Your favorite meal?
Cheeseburger, bacon cheeseburger. Can't have them as much as I'd like at my age, but that's I would say bacon cheeseburger. Yeah.
You too. What are you reading?
What am I what?
Reading.
What am I reading? I'm not really reading anything right now. I'm so embarrassed to admit that. But I just read a book called, what's it called? What We Leave Behind, or what something about this family that goes to a B&B and like the world ends or something. I can't remember the name of it now. It's sold for a huge amount of money, and they're going to make a movie with Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington.
That's amazing. I want to read that now, even before you name that it's going to be a movie.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a very good writer.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
What show do you oh wait, no, I'm not gonna ask you that one. A film you really love. You don't have to say your favorite, just 1 or 2.
A film I really love, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Apartment, Nashville. A recent film I really love. I have to think. I feel my brain goes blank. So those 3.
Okay. And what's a concert you'll never forget?
U2.
Oh. Like in the 80s U2 or like
Yeah, in the 80s, and Bruce Springsteen in the 80s, and the Police, and Devo and the B-52s.
dang, those are really good. My favorite Prince. I saw Prince at the Forum.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when he did that 30-day thing, that was amazing. Okay.
I saw Prince too. That's another one.
What is something people sometimes get wrong about you and you want to clear up?
I don't know. I try not to read too much that is written about me, so I don't really know. I know.
You can give too if you feel.
I know sometimes people think I'm standoffish, and I'm just really shy.
Oh, and Southern, right? That's
And
like,
Southern, exactly, and polite. So I just sort of go stand in the corner.
sometimes people think I'm really quiet and I'm like, no, I just don't want to be guns a-blazing if I'm new to a place, you know?
Exactly.
What's one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
I am deeply grateful for my dogs because I love being in the presence of creatures who just live in the moment. They don't worry about the past, and they don't, obsess about the future. So they're just here. They're actually both here. You might be able to see her back there in the corner.
Oh, I see both of them. They're very, the one's passed out. Is that a English Terrier?
The little one is
English Terrier?
French bulldog. He's a cow.
Hey,
Beagles.
stop.
Yeah, his beagle side is more prominent.
What are you doing?
And then, if there's one thing you could change about the entertainment industry, what would it be?
Well, I mean, this is completely unrealistic, but not so profit-driven. Because I feel like I really love the fact that there's so many different platforms now for visual storytelling, but I do feel like they've, at least in my experience in development and things, they just really want to make things that resemble something that has already been successful, because everybody's, scared to there's so much money on the line, and I get it. I totally get it. But it would be nice if everything wasn't just about money.
That's what comes with like lack thinking and fear-based thinking, and it's like if you come from a place of feeling secure too, you won't be chasing that all the time. But that's the we wave a wand.
I thought of something else I'm really grateful for. That Trump got voted out of office.
Yeah.
Now he just needs to go to prison. Just send them to build their own prison. They can have gold toilets in it. Just get them the hell out of here.
You and me both. Let's make it our Christmas wish. New Year too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen. This has been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's not much of a podcast. It's okay.
Hey, it's Mr. Nobody to you, pal, and don't you forget it. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. I will accept Sir Nobody as well, so that's okay. Speaking of Nobody, that's our movie today, and we have with us screenwriter Derek Kolstad for the Q&A. And man, this was a fun one. It's been a hot minute. We haven't had Derek in the series since John Wick 2, and I'm so glad to have him back because I thoroughly enjoyed Nobody. It's a fun film, and it's violent, but the violence is cartoonish and absurd, kind of like the world that Nobody, the character in the film, is fighting against. And it was interesting. My 11-year-old daughter, who would not watch Godzilla vs. Kong with me, because she was worried about all the people getting hurt as collateral damage in the different buildings, she was very excited to see this movie based on the trailer, because who doesn't want to see a movie about a dad kicking ass because someone has stolen his daughter's kitty cat bracelet? I mean, that's heroism right there when a guy goes after somebody to get the bracelet back. But she was thoroughly entertained by it. My wife, who really basically opts out of almost any movie I'm going to watch because she says it's either too violent or too scary, she sat down and watched it because she was curious and she absolutely loved it. I thought it was a fun movie. Derek has a way in his writing of creating these unique worlds and these quirky characters that inhabit the world, and everybody is on a justified track toward revenge, at least in their own minds always. And look, it's a lot of fun. I hope you check it out because I think you too will be entertained as well. And as for our Q&A, Derek was very forthcoming about what it took to get this film made that he's been trying to make for the last 5 years. And so I know you'll dig this podcast. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app. Backstory, go figure, that's what it's called. And look, folks, there's a lot of cool stuff to explore. And we are working really hard on our Oscar issue, which is going to be coming out soon. So we would love to have you as a subscriber. If you've never read us before, you can check out our free issue over at backstory.net. And, it's a full issue, so you'll know what we're about. And hopefully you'll then decide that you want to subscribe. And if you do, we would love to have you, so I'm going to offer you a discount coupon code. It is SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. You could enter that in the checkout cart at backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription and give you access to our archive, which goes back to about issue 29. And we're building to put in more issues in there as well, but we're also working on our new issue right now, and that has to take precedent over everything else. But look, there's a lot to explore in Backstory, so I hope you check it out, because I would really appreciate having my podcast listeners and the Backstory Magazine YouTube watchers, because remember, we're putting all these Zoom podcasts up on the Backstory tour. His lesson was on John Wick 2. Something that you couldn't have really seen at the time, but just something that in your oeuvre, in your creative process, something that you maybe picked up on John Wick 2, or a lesson that you learned that you've kind of carried forward.
From a production standpoint and from a story standpoint, one of the things I've always said lately when I do these pitches on other projects is, like, the way into any television show or franchise or game, I love Saving Private Ryan, but the best way in is Hell is for Heroes, right? You're in a trench, you're taking out one, machine gun nest, right? And everything else is taking place in the background. And you have this intimacy of character. And what was so cool about John Wick 2 is it was our gauntlet, a la Clint Eastwood, it was our game of death. And to get there, it was going through a dozen other ideas, a couple other scripts. And the other thing, too, is when John Wick 2 came out, it was never a sense of, talking from my standpoint, of like, oh, I've made it now, or any sense of impending grandeur, or whatever you might call it. But it was always like, cool. And yet, I was reminded time and time again, it was around that time that I first got to know Bob Odenkirk. And we first talked to nobody. When you think our first meeting was 5 years ago, which is like a lifetime, but it's a couple of weeks. That's the weird life thing. And one of the things that he said to me in that first meeting was, Derek, the best thing that ever happened to me was becoming famous later in life. And I took that to heart, and being 40 when your first theatrical movie comes out, and now being 46, 47 in a week or two, and be at the stage, I think it wasn't a hard reset. It was a little bit of a 3% perspective shift of going like, okay, cool. You're okay, man. Just focus and, remember and realize you didn't do this alone, and to lean in when you can't do it alone,
I think that's sound advice. John Wick 2 is well received, and the franchise is moving forward, and it's been reported lately, unfortunately, that you're not going to be joining the other stuff that's going on. You co-wrote on John Wick 3, and John Wick 4 and 5 is gonna move forward without you, and then obviously there's going to be a TV show of the Continental, and I'm sure it must be tough, and I don't want to put you into any sort of imposition to talk about it, but I'm just curious what advice you would have for other writers, because it's a blessing and a curse to create something like that the world loves, in which you give up your IP technically when you sell your screenplay, but your name, because of WGA protections, will always be associated with it. They won't be ripping you off like they might have in the old days, in which you'll always see a revenue stream, which could, give you the impetus to pursue other creative projects as well. And who knows, maybe one day they will have you back for something. So I'm just curious, like, do you think that there's any sort of a teaching moment from something like this, or what your experience has been and what you expect it to be going forward, just watching from a distance?
You begin in this trade in the trenches alongside a number of people, and at a certain point, you're part of building a machine. And if that machine becomes successful, you watch as it roars off. And to me, since the age of 12, I wanted to write movies, man. I that's what I wanted to do. It took fucking forever, but John Wick gave me that opportunity. So to everyone involved in that production, in that endeavor, they were the gateway to where I am now. So in that respect, I'll always be, grateful and gracious, and hopefully, you think of the ability to pay back in full. Like, I see what's happening with John Wick 4 or 5 in the Continental, and I'm gonna be first in line, man. And I know some of the other writers involved. Of course, I can't speak highly enough to Chad and Keanu.
Hello.
Here, Celia, are you on? Are you on mute?
No matter where this thing goes and how it might evolve, dude, the seed was planted by me, and the garden was tended to by them. And so, look, man, you could lean into the negative of these things, but the positive is, I made that thing, and that thing is letting me make other things. And as Lance Reddick always says, Derek, I just want to do cool shit. And
That's awesome.
John Wick has allowed me to do a lot of cool shit. So,
and I can't wait to see what you do next. And I really actually enjoyed watching Nobody, which we're going to get to in a couple of minutes. But since you just said that you wanted to write movies since you were 12, a lot of 12-year-olds don't even think about the writing. They think about the directing first. And I'm curious, do you remember what the impetus was for that choice of yours? Was there a movie that inspired you when you maybe for the first time in your life realized, oh yeah, movies are written? It's not just something that appears there or is improvised or is directed.
Hey, it's twofold. One, the movie was Predator.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it was the first rated R movie I saw in the theater on opening night.
If it bleeds, we could kill it.
Gosh. And what people don't remember at the time is first it was deafening. It was my best friend Ryan Lindley and his father Joe, and I can't remember who else went, and it was just awe-inspiring. But before that, I always loved writing short stories. I always loved reading. I was a voracious reader. And when
we had short story day in class, I became known as that kid who killed off all of his students in the short stories. But it was always like, sweet, I had a cool death in one of Derek's stories, right? And it was just fun. And then when you saw a movie and you saw the written by, it was that magical moment of like, oh, I could marry these two things that I fucking love, right? And that's kind of where it began, you know? And when you think of the genre of it all, I've always loved action. You know, my mom and dad have always encouraged me in this. And in the early 80s, when a lot of those movies came out off trademark, off copyright, they were, remember, like 99 cents in the grocery store bin or whatever? My mom would grab these old black and white movies and I would eat them up. But I was also the kid who was scared of everything. You know, I couldn't watch PG movies. They scared the shit out of me. And it wasn't until we were on a road trip and my great uncle overheard this, and he came up to where we were staying and he handed me this giant book. And he said, Derek, if you make it through this, you won't be scared anymore. And it was a first edition hard copy of It by Stephen King.
Wow. And
he was right. It scared the shit out of me, but it made me a lover of Stephen King and a lover even more so of writing. And that was kind of the gateway drug. That formed the path, you know.
You know, just for Stephen King fans out there, something cool that he's done, and he just did like literally a couple weeks ago. It came out. There's a great imprint of books called Hard Case Crime, and they've revived a lot of out of print pulps, but they've also inspired new crime thrillers. And Stephen King wrote a brand new crime thriller called Later.
I haven't read it yet. Is it out?
It's out. It just came out. It just came out.
Because, you know, the thing about Stephen King that I've always loved is, you know, of course, the world building is phenomenal, but there are short stories that you will be walking somewhere alone, thinking about work, and you will see something, and you will be flooded by that story.
What's one of your faves?
Honestly, Jaunt. Jaunt is still one of my favorites, you know, the sci-fi one.
Yeah.
Because it's small, but it's massive, and it's intimate. And then when you look at a lot of the other ones, to me, there's like he did this one. I never remember its name, but I think about it daily, so I need to look it up again. But it's the it's like a hardcore neo-noir detective, where it's revealed that the writer is replacing himself with his creation, and it becomes this switcheroo. And you're like, it was so well done that it's impossible to pitch, and hopefully I didn't, you know, hacksaw too much there.
I
At the very end,
like it's the one that's kind of like Purple Rose of Cairo, but on the page, right?
Yes. And then what ends up happening at the very end, the author has some kind of disease, some kind of singing detective type thing, and he successfully switches out with his creation, right? So the creation is in the apartment in real life, and because it's his creation, he sits down and starts typing. And you're just like, oh shit, you know? But I will say the one that made me finish reading it and I couldn't sleep through the night was the way he ended Pet Sematary. I don't know if you remember that one. He ended it by saying, yeah, I can't finish it. Like it's a note to the reader where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to turn around. Like, because you know his wife.
That at all.
Like, he goes and he buries his wife.
Yeah.
And he's in the kitchen and the wife is entering the kitchen. And you're like, you turn the page, and there's a note from there's like a letter from him saying, yeah, guys, I'm done. I didn't love that, you know. But I mean, again, huge fan of that guy, and there's a lot of us are that you'd be surprised that when I watch movies, the only genre I really keep up with is horror because goddamn, it's so cathartic.
Sure. When did the idea first form for Nobody? You just said that like it was about 5 or 6 years ago that you even talked to Odekirk about it. So clearly, you knew you wanted him in it. Was it something that you wrote specifically with him in mind, or just your script was done and you were starting to see who you could attach?
No, it was a general that came out of nowhere. He and his wife had been watching cable on the road, and they caught John Wick, and they loved it. He was totally into it, but surprisingly, she really dug it too. And he had always wanted to do his. Let's be honest. If I was an actor, I want to be Indiana Jones and James Bond. You know, I think a lot of people do. I want to be Jack. I want to be. I want to play that role. And he never had the opportunity to do that. And so they called me on like a Thursday. Braden Aftergood, Mark Provisario, and I went over to his offices there on in kind of near where AFI is, and come in and sit down. And that night I had a dream. It was a black and white dream about the opening scene. And I told Sonia that the next morning. She was like, yeah, you got to tell him that. And so I told him the opening scene. And he looks at me and goes, you're fucking hired. and by the way, I didn't know what the what we were meeting about yet, but he wanted to do something where, it begins the classic 70s inspired way. You bring in the world building of John Wick, but you allow him to have humor, levity, and soul, which in everything I do, I want there to be humor, levity, and soul, because I'm not a cynic. There are things out there that are massive in the IP world and film and TV that I'm not the audience, and you'd be surprised that I'm not the audience because I'm a silver lining guy,
We're gonna have a spoiler section, so I don't know if we need to save it for there.
But it's not much of a spoiler, but this is the scene, right? So it's his character Hutch. It's a shot of him at the end of a long table, kind of done like the Third Man or M, right? And he's just sitting there. He's beaten to shit.
Oh, it's the opening of the movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And we of course we did a little bit different because you got time. Time is your enemy. And he's looking at the camera, and suddenly, buy me a ticket on the airplane begins to play. We all the song, and it's deafening, and yet it's kind of only in his head. He reaches over his pocket, he brings out a pack of cigarettes, taps them out, takes off that little plastic string, looks over and realizes these two fingers are dangling. So he's like, snaps them back into place, ties them with the string, cigarette, lighter, smokes, exhales, reaches into his pocket, brings out a kitten. Brings his other pocket, brings out a can of tuna.
Right.
Other pocket brings out an opener, and the kitten starts eating in front of him. And it's a notoriously short song. So it ends, and there's this voice off screen that says, "Who the fuck are you?"
And that was in your dream. In your dream, there was a voice off screen.
Yeah, and he said, "Me, I'm Nick," and that was the title. And so you've seen in the trailer, it's elemental to that. But that's where we started with. And the greatest thing about working with Bob is he's a comedian, he's an actor, he is your dad's best friend, it's your favorite uncle. But he's also an incredibly talented writer, to the point that when you get notes, you look forward to them because it makes you a better writer and it makes the project a better project. And he spent, much like Keanu did on the John Wicks, he spent just as much time on the secondary and tertiary characters as he did on himself, because it's one thing for a guy to enter a room going, I'm Derek Colston, I'm badass. It's another thing for a guy to enter the room and be very kind to the dog, and you have that big guy's like, who the fuck's this? And then the character leaves, he's like, yeah, do you know who that is? That's more badass, right? And he understood that, and we just got the geek out there.
That's awesome. See, I was going to ask that later. Was that a bookend? Was that something that they drew in? Like,
it was the first thing I wrote.
That was the first thing you wrote. I love it. Well, so tell me this: when you sit down to write, so you now have this dream. How important is outlining to your process? So we've talked about this before, but I'm just curious if it's changed at all.
If I spec for me, I like diving into the script. I kind of like going chaos. I don't do much of an outline, but I also do a lot of scribbling. I do a lot of walking, a lot of hiking. I play way too much Hearthstone, which I suck at, or Civilization on the iPad, which I get bored at. But the whole time I'm thinking. But that's spec for me. For other things, like pitches are key. Treatments are fun. And there's a lot. Treatment rewriting is the worst, but that first draft of treatment, that's key. So to be able to hand someone an 18-page treatment going, here's the whole movie, go through with your red pen and say, no, yes, add, yes, no, So by the time we're all locked down on that treatment, then I can go off and sprint. Because by the time you get to script on any of these things, that's, in my experience, the least amount of work, because you get to run. Now, when you start rewriting, holy Lord. But, again, to answer your question, for me, just give me the empty page. But for anything else that's going to be more collaborative, love the treatment. Beat sheets, I'd rather flesh it out a bit more. I think it's just it has a life to its own as a treatment and leaps off the page a bit.
So there was no treatment for nobody, I'm guessing then. because it was not collaborative?
You know what? It was a little bit of both, because it was emails, it was pages. I mean, it was kind of like that, kind of a bit of a weird creature, because we also knew that once you have that first draft, then the real work begins. It was still fun, but it's work fun, because the hard thing about movies like John Wick and Nobody and a lot of what I do is, in order to really layer out the foundations, you have a long first act, and that's what's so great about the Bond movies, especially the ones with Roger Moore, right? You begin with the last action sequence for a movie that doesn't exist. Your first, and that's the prologue. Your first act could be 40 minutes, but who cares? Did you see that thing he did skiing? And so that was always like, hey, the inciting incident doesn't happen to page 38 or 39 or 40. Now, by the time you get to editing, and Evan is phenomenal. And what I love about him is he sees what we're trying to do. And when I first saw the movie, there is this sequence that's on 8 pages, right? And we all loved it and didn't want to change it. And suddenly on screen, it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I was like, yeah, that's much better.
Right, the opening of the movie, I was going to ask about that. That's fantastic.
No, and that's, dude, that is Ilya, that is Evan, that is Kelly, Dave. I mean, that's Braden. It's the whole team.
Yeah.
That's what I think is great. It's going back. We joked about this before. It's going back to favorite scenes in movies are usually an accident, or someone in post going, guys, just do this. You're like, oh, thank God.
So how long did it take you before you kind of had these emails of treatment that you went to your script stage? How long was it percolating?
It was pretty fast. Just because you know how you get involved in certain projects and there's an energy in the room, and that was the energy in the room. We just had a great time talking about it, and we sprinted off. And of course, it was a pitch first. We had pages of the script, we had treatments, all that kind of stuff, but let's go out with it as a pitch, and we pitched everybody. And there was one day we were at one of the big agencies. I don't remember which one. And we did.
Just want to clarify, it's you and Bob, right?
Me and Bob.
Okay.
And we did 9 pitches back to back. After that, I just wanted to die. Bob could have gone run a marathon, right? Kind of goes to the different personalities there. But ultimately, we set it up at STX, and they let it lapse. And then, Bob, he's such a proponent of this thing since day one. We ended up, I got a close relationship with Dave and Kelly at Ace of the North, and they had signed a deal with Universal, and they carried it over, the goal line.
It's a curious thing, right? Because there was a heyday for pitching where writers, even without an actor attached, could pitch and get assignments.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give you a statistical analysis because I can't remember what it was, but I would say it's pretty safe to say that 60% at least of those scripts were coming in as junk. Like they sold in the room, everyone's jazzed because that's your personality, right? That's your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Goal.
The goal line.
It's a curious thing, right? Because there was a heyday for pitching where writers, even without an actor attached, could pitch and get assignments.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give you a statistical analysis because I can't remember what it was, but I would say it's pretty safe to say that 60% at least of those scripts were coming in as junk. Like they sold in the room, everyone's jazzed because that's your personality, right? That's your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But when it was time to sit down and get that on the page, it didn't always happen. And it made people a little shy about buying some of those pitches. But when you have an actor attached, it's a different story. So I'm actually surprised to hear that, when you were going around, Odenkirk had already done Breaking Bad. I don't think Better Call Saul had launched. So it's kind of surprising that, it didn't sell in the room. But so was the lesson there that you needed to go to script stage, or was it that?
No, the lesson there was, it's the classic, was it William Goldman, nobody knows anything,
Yeah, of course.
And it was like everyone liked us. Everyone liked the idea. But it didn't fit any algorithm, for the streamers, for the international, all of those things, right? And it's almost like you were bound by that equation. I mean, that's really what it came down to. And so, again, it was the star power date, and it was the wisdom of Kelly. It was them becoming teammates to Greg, Mark, and all the other participants and players, to the point that, when I visit set, my job should be done. That's the way I always look at it, because we do so much, right? That's something to blow up, and you'll do location, there'll be some work. Like when I'm set, to see everyone who was a part of that on set all this time at 2 in the morning in Winnipeg when it's like negative, and still grinning is pretty awesome.
That's awesome. All right. Well, so when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit each day or a certain amount of hours to hit each day?
It keeps shifting, to be honest.
So on Nobody, what was it?
On Nobody? Probably 4 hours a day.
Okay.
And then if I'm doing just writing, if I do more than a 4-hour stretch, it's gonna be kind of like junk. Not junk, just like, okay, I'm spent, right? And yet I like having, but then I can also go 4 hours on this thing and then shift to something else and then it's like, oh sweet, we get to play in this new sandbox, right? So as much as I love the writing of things, what I'd say to most writers, screenwriters, is when this becomes a real career, the writing part of it is the smallest part of it in regards to time. Most of it is this, and zooming, and notes, and treatments, and pitches, and again, it's all great, but at the same time, I make sure that at the end of every day, for at least 10, 15 minutes, and sometimes it goes off late in the night, I open up an empty document and just say, fade in, Diner, Harlem in 1941, and then just write for a bit. That becomes what I call an orphan. Nothing might ever come with that. But just
Every day you do that?
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, Ray Bradbury was famous for his writing every day and stuff like that, and he had this drawer full of...
Not really. I have certain files that I collect these things, but a lot of times I remember the scenes and the characters that I like, and I'll bring them back in other iterations. My thing with writing is, and I'm sure that, going back to what we talked about Stephen King, he probably looks back at some of his earlier work and he's just like, man, I changed, Not gotten worse or better, it's just the voice changes because you grow older. Everyone changes. So when I find myself in meetings every now and then, and they're like, yeah, we're looking at this kind of movie. And I was like, I expect something like that. Then you go back and read it, like, I'm not sending that to you.
That's funny.
I think come the end of it, it's like, writing just isn't the typing. When you look at Falcon and you look at TV shows, the work is done in the room, and it's a collaborative effort with people who are just geeking out, and they're taking IP, they're laying the foundation, they're diving into character, and they are doing layer after layer after layer, and they're finding some way that subtext is key, and that character is soul, and then by the time you're off to write the script, you're like, okay, now I get to type.
That's awesome, and we'll make sure to talk about Falcon and Winter Soldier a little later as well. What do you do if you get writer's block? If you get it, how do you handle it?
Everyone gets it, and for myself, it's an anxiety, and usually it's not. What would you call it? It's not writer's block. It's everything else, kind of telling you like you cannot write. You're the classic, like, you're a failure, fuck off there. And I think what I do is twofold. One, I make myself write a page, and that's just typing, but there's this connection between your mind and your fingertips where you're like, okay, no, I can write. And then, dude, it's like when people are in the car, they're working out, and they listen to their favorite song. And for me, one of the glorious aspects of YouTube is tracking down your favorite scene. There are movies that I'll watch over and over again, but I think here's an example. It's during John Wick 2, which was very tough. I would go downstairs in front of an old plasma TV, right? They kind of threw off heat, and I would turn on YouTube and I would watch the trailer for Mad Max Fury Road, and I would spread my arms out in this big fucking grin because the energy was like, that is the fuel, So that's what I do.
What are some other favorite trailers or scenes that you like other than that?
The opening of Point Blank with Lee Marvin.
Absolutely.
Um,
Walking through LAX, right?
Oh, dude, yeah. The USS Indianapolis scene from Jaws. Any scene in Starship Troopers, man. Like, I really, dude, when the bug, was it Michael Ironside? Oh, Michael Ironside, right? When the bugs come over the ridge, he goes, oh. Like stuff like that, Yeah. But I'm also a big fan of the old black and whites. So, James Cagney, watching, White Heat or something like that, and you just bask in it. And, I love humor in movies. I'm not a comedic writer. I think those guys are just geniuses, and they're created differently. But I'll put on like any of the Howard Hawks movies or something like Harvey, and suddenly it's like going into a time machine and going like, "Hey, Derek, everything's okay."
That's cool. We live in a crazy time and a violent society, unfortunately. And now that people are starting to come back out again after the pandemic, after quarantining a bit, as people are getting vaccinated, I don't know what it is, but some of the crazies are coming out, unfortunately. And, we just within the last week had 2 different public massacres. One in Atlanta and one in Boulder, Colorado. And it's very sad. And anytime a movie is coming out that has any sort of violence connected with it, some people try and pin that on the movies, which I think is overall unfair. Because if you look into everything from the ideologies or just the problems that most of these shooters are having, it's not coming from their media. I mean, there have been study after study, and very few people you will find that it's the media's the movies that they're consuming's fault, right? It's equally to pin Catcher in the Rye on the killing of John Lennon, and should it be a banned book, was something that was talked about a lot of the time, and that it's not really about that book exactly. And here we are, this movie's coming out, and I know it's tough because there's going to be some people that are just turned off by the violence they see, even though there's nothing like it in your movie, because your movie is a very wacky, and I say that lovingly.
I'll take it, man.
It is a wacky and zany revenge tale.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious your thoughts about kind of, the reality of violence versus sometimes what I would call the cartoon violence that we see in your movies, which sure people could say is fetishistic, but like in a much different way than promoting it. I mean, like, just the concept of John Wick. Someone kills his dog and he wants revenge. And he just happens to be a fighter and he knows how to take it. But what are your thoughts on that? The reality of it versus, cinema.
The realities of tragedy like that are, when it occurs, you always try to reason your way into and out of it at the same time, and everyone wants to find something to blame. But I think the people that are at the forefront saying it's your kind of movies there that are responsible are also massive fans of Star Wars and Indiana Jones and James Bond, and they're really no different than mine outside of what occurs off screen and what's on. And yet, when these things happen, the saddest aspect is the detachment of those involved. Those who perpetrate, and there's a sadness, a sorrow there, especially with the repetition. We look at all of us have a cross to bear in that regards, right? And yet, when it comes to the movies, like I'm 46, turned 47 in a couple of weeks.
Congrats. Happy birthday.
Thanks, bud. Made it. But when you look at the generations I grew up with, it was video games that cause violence. Movies that cause violence.
Oh yeah, I could remember having an argument literally with my mom about Space Invaders.
Yeah,
and the violence of Space Invaders.
I remember there was this old one called Death Race that you would run down. Yeah, it was old pixelated black and white, and then make a skull and crossbones. And it's like that encouraged you to run around people. And you're like, really? And then Dungeons and Dragons was a big one in the 80s. You had Panic. It's like that's a gateway drug. It's like, is it?
For anyone that doesn't know this, look up the Tom Hanks Dungeon.
Oh, I saw it when it was on, dude. Yeah.
That was one of his first movies. It was a TV movie special about the dangers of Dungeons and Dragons. And wow, now the name's evading me. But yes, look in Tom Hanks's career. I think it was called. I can't remember the title. I don't want to get it wrong. But like literally, people were that panicked about D&D that they thought that kids playing it would go, as they do in the movie, into an actual cave, like an actual dangerous ass cave, and do crazy stuff that's going to get other kids killed.
Yeah. Well, and you look at the realities of life, and you look at the imagination of film, and you could quite easily cloister the two and say they're very different, but there are connections, you know. And yet at the same time, you know, I'm not a violent guy. I'm not a gun guy. I'm not an anti-gun guy. I'm not a, you know, like when you think of all these little aspects of like, oh, of course he's this. It's like, no, man, I'm a guy who grew up with these movies that, like Predator, you're chuckling the whole time because there is an absurdity to the action movie genre, and that's why we enjoy it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the more real it gets, the more you're like, man, I'm having fun here, you know?
My daughter's 11, and somehow in her YouTube feed, she came across the trailer for Nobody. And she sees a guy that says, they stole my daughter's, what is it, kitty cat
bracelet.
And like, she's like, oh my God, this movie looks amazing. Can I see it? I'm like, funny you should ask. I'm interviewing Derek tomorrow. And the screener just came through. Are you sure you want to see it? Because a week ago, she would not watch Godzilla vs. Kong with me because she started telling me that all those people in the buildings are dying. It's just too much death for her. And I'm like, this is a rated R. I will let you watch it if you want. But like, there's going to be, you know, a lot of shooting. Strangely, this girl also plays Fortnite and keeps telling me, you know, and I play with her sometimes. She keeps telling me about the community is fun for Fortnite. I'm like, community? Battle Royale. There's one person standing. The only community is when you do a co-op game together. You're still killing people. But yeah, honestly, she was like loving the whole movie. My wife, who never wants to watch violent movies, just saw it going on and came in. And she couldn't leave the whole time. What you have a knack for is a really good blending of that kind of action that you just talked about when you're grinning, in which you're, I don't want to say cartoonish because that's too easy of a word, but there's something about it that is hyper realized. It is not, you're not watching 3 Days of the Condor or something that has a gritty, realistic feel to it that is, you know, disturbing. I mean, the post office guy coming in the beginning of 3 Days of the Condor is still disturbing, and I saw it as a kid.
By the way, like I reference that movie every week.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a realism to it. So it's like this was something that the entire movie like was just transfixed with all the intricacies that we're going to talk about in the spoiler section, which we're going to get to soon, of just everything from the traps the character creates to the weird decisions. So we're going to get to the spoiler section. You know, the last question before I get there would be that concept of this everyman who we later learn has a past. You know, he has the fighting skills baked in, but he's trying to live a suburban life. Like that's clear from the trailer. And I'm only talking about stuff in the trailer right now. the concept that he is sent off his, you know, humble path by someone stealing his daughter's kitty cat bracelet. When did that idea pop in your mind? Because it is so funny. And it does have that resonance of John Wick, you mess with my dog.
Oh, no, here's the other thing.
It's sillier.
I mean, I think that John Wick and nobody, like, if they're not anti-heroes, right? Like, in my head, they're heroes. Like, John Wick's greatest strength is he befriends people. Like, when you really look at those movies, like, everyone kind of owes him for that thing he did, you know? He's a badass, sure, but, like, he's also, you know, got a moral compass for being a slaughterer of man, right? And I think with the kitty cat bracelet, it was, what is the excuse, you know? There's no subtext to that actual bracelet. It's an excuse for him to let loose for the first time in a long time. And when, of course, you realize who did what they did, they can't. And then, of course, you get in the movie and an opportunity arises when he can. It's just roller coaster.
If we're going to talk about that, I think that's a good place to stop before the spoiler section. Spoilers. What was the budget and schedule? That's our last non-spoiler question.
Dude, 180 million. No. It was 15 million, give or take. I think it's something like 15, 14, 8.
1.5?
1.5, baby.
Wow.
And that
Ilya killed it on the screen.
Oh, dude, again, man. You think of the producers, the director, the editors, Daniel Bernhardt, who we all recognize and love from all of his work.
dude, he trained Bob for 3 years. They became close, and he was integral to this thing. And he had a great getting his ass kicked scene on the bus, right? But everyone, it'd be cliche for me to refer to anything as like, oh, it was a labor of love, right? But when I first showed up on set, it was 2 a.m. Winnipeg. It was cold. There is a bus crashed in the middle of the street. There is a body lying in front of it. And I'm walking up and I hear, okay, cut. And that body gets up and popped. And that was a hard 24-hour day of fight, and everyone's exhausted. But the number of times Ilya would yell cut, and everyone would be like, oh, and you're fucking tired. Like you just, the energy, and that's Bob, man. Bob, even when he's got the big coat and he's got the frozen Caro syrup on his face, and he's been dropped on his ass any number of times, I show up and he's like, "We're here, Darren. Come here, big bear. How can you be?" So $15 million, miraculous.
And yet, obviously, there's Canadian tax credits that go into play.
Yeah.
And we don't have those, strangely enough, here in America, especially in California. I still don't know why. I love Canadian production. I am not in any way.
I love big plug on Winnipeg, man. Love that city, love the people. And that crew was phenomenal.
I will never understand why there are not better California tax credits, though. It's just the strangest thing. But so, how many days was the shoot? How many days?
I'm not quite sure, but I want to say around 30, sub 30. 28 to 31. And they could correct me but it was, to again, I say this quite a bit, but to Dave Leitch's credit, like on the last day they had a pre-lit set, which is the action sequence. And by the way, that action sequence in the script was never really written, just because we didn't, when we got there, it was like, cool stuff happens. So when you see
which sequence are you referring to?
The siege, the
very factory. You're talking about the factory?
Yeah, the factory.
Okay, we're starting to get into the spoilers, but yeah, okay. So it was pre-lit.
So it's pre-lit, and they're out of time and money. And Dave grabbed a camera and an assistant and spent the whole day walking around getting pickup shots. So here's David Leitch coming off of some of the largest movies known to man, and being a producer on this thing, and still geeking out and going, "Hey, let me lend a hand." And in the editing phase, they had a folder that was like, "Hey, Dave," and they'd be like, "Oh, thank God you got that thing," So you think of true collaboration, that was a bunch of us geeking out on the playground after school. So
we are getting into the spoiler section. Folks, if you have not yet seen Nobody, please go rent it online in the place that you would find movies to rent. You know how to do that. You're going to be going to iTunes or Amazon, obviously. You could also see it on demand, I'm pretty sure, through your cable system. So rent it, buy it, do whatever you want, because we're going to get into the spoilers. I think that it's interesting, like the movie's called Nobody, and he's from an official CIA program where he's titled Nobody, and it's all redacted. And you have an amazing skill for conveying a lot of backstory in a very short amount of time. When did the concept that he would be part of this Nobody program? That's pretty much all you need to say. You don't need a big monologue about it come about. I mean, by the way, again, the way that you did it, somebody being blackmailed, they have to go through all folders to get it. You're also very good at quick exposition that's entertaining. When did that come about?
I mean, I grew up with the old Pulp Fiction, Pulp Noir, Austrian Plains of the world, and they were very swift to key on that. And I love this, like movies like I say this quite a bit, but like North by Northwest. You have that one line where the guy says he's a man who some secrets, and you're like, oh, that's a whole movie because nothing else matters. Like what's in what's the MacGuffin? Like, yay, let's have fun. But also just like movies like I say this quite a bit, but like North by Northwest. You have that one line where the guy says he's a man who deals in secrets, and you're like, oh, that's a whole movie. It does nothing.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just working on something, period. I think Google Drive is fine, period. I use it for all of my stuff, period.
Nothing else matters. Like what's in what's the MacGuffin? Who gives a shit? Like, yay, let's have fun. But also like I remember that scene in Faster with Dwayne Johnson, where at the beginning he's standing there as that giant Samoan guy. The giant Samoan guy looks at the tattoo on his arm, and he's just kind of like, I'm out. That is exposition that I want to do. And so it's really those kinds of things where you see a tattoo, or Ronan is another great example. I bring up weekly, people are sick of hearing it. But like, where he spills his coffee and the guy catches it. And he's like, in that moment, volumes of understanding went between the two. So in film, you have to get as close to the answer swiftly, and that's the best way to do it. In TV, you can bait and switch for seasons. That to me has been the biggest change between the two mediums. But I always love where you have that scene in a movie where it's like, yeah, the classic like Jason Bourne and Treadstone speeches. You're just like, what? I love that. It's both unique yet familiar.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, just like starting out on the page before we get into the details. Are there any left turns you can tell me where for a while everybody was going to have this subplot or go in this direction, and it never made it on the screen? It's not a deleted scene. It was just for a week or a month. There was like, oh my God, this is so cool. It's going to be so great. But then you had to abandon it either for budget, schedule, or just it didn't fit.
One of the ones we all loved, but because of budget and because of time we didn't do, is when that one guy, it was our favorite sequence, and I can't remember the actor's name. I'll look him up quick, but he played kind of the CIA agent. He's the guy who kind of shows up. He's the barber, right?
Oh, the barber. Sorry, I was going to ask you about that later. Yeah.
But he was a much bigger part of the script. By bigger, meant 5 more pages, and it'll be bigger throughout. But the idea is that the scene that we wrote is that guy, isn't he like the principal from Community? I don't remember. But anyway, he gets a call, and the guy's like, can you look this guy up? And he types in Hutch's name on the computer, and you get the spinning wheel of death, and the computer shuts down. And he's like, huh. So he walks out, and it's a crowded floor of people. He takes the elevator downstairs, goes to a second terminal, same thing happens, goes downstairs to the old library cards, finds something missing, goes downstairs, and we follow him MOS, set music only, until he gets down into the archives, which is this bolted room. We have all these leather-bound books, and there's this stack of leather-bound books, and they're wrapped tight with twine. He cuts the twine, opens it up, and every single line of these books is redacted except for the word nobody. And he's like, and then he goes back upstairs with one of the books, or a couple of the books, and he goes on his floor, and as he walks to the office, you realize the entire floor is empty. And he walks into the office, and there's that character, the barber. We loved it so much that we didn't have the time anymore, right?
That's great.
But that kind of the unspoken
So the barber was going to show up to the archivist.
Yeah.
He knew that there was a search going on. Okay.
But that scene though in the barbershop, and it's so good though. It's almost like it's good enough, like cool. And it leaves you wanting more and seeing what else exists in this world,
And it's a thing that you're good at, again, as I said, like exposition coming at you fast but in an interesting way. You do that with these characters like the barber, right? There's the concierge at the hotel, the Continental. You take these jobs that you think are kind of boring, but like, no, they're interesting characters in this universe. The barber is, of course, connected, and it was an exposition dump for sure, but a very short one and a very interesting one. And it made you wonder more about that character. So that's cool to hear. You were talking about seeing a tattoo. You have this way of broadcasting exposition again. Now that we can get into these details, in which, look, somebody breaks into nobody's house in the beginning. He decides to kind of let them off because he knows that he can just take them. And when he finds out that they stole his daughter's, bracelet, so he thinks, he hunts them down based on a tattoo. And at one point, when he goes into tattoo parlors and he's talking about it, a veteran notices his tattoo, and it's the cards, 7 and 2, and which is a shitty starting hand in poker for sure.
The worst.
So basically, and that guy's just like, he's out, he leaves, and like that like there's more to
we're in the spoiler section, right?
We are in the spoiler
Okay.
section.
My favorite thing about that scene that wasn't in the script is they cut it as a kind of an internal joke, but everyone responded so well to the guy walking out of the room, closing the door, and going chink, chink, chink.
And she locks the door.
Slide. And they thought it was too comic booky, but everyone's reaction was just laughing.
Oh,
and we were like, let's do it. Let's keep it,
And we'll broadcast to the other guys in the tattoo room that are still with him. They've just been locked in.
I do like, oh, hey, man, what do you mean? You know, like, I can't say.
And so you're really good at doing that. But, like, even when he finds the young couple that robbed him, he's starting to kick their ass. They have no idea what he's talking about with the bracelet. And then he hears a baby crying, and all he does is peek into the room, and you see a baby on an oxygen mask. And it says everything in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And so, when did that idea coming up with not just having a baby and they were parents that, were doing this for their young child, but, like, they have a baby that has medical needs?
No, I think that was, at the very, very beginning, because we loved the idea that Bob, Hutch, the character, he was going to get his revenge, and he needed this outlet. But then he saw that they were desperate, and that they were human, and that he connected with them on the best side of who he was, and he was deflated, So when he leaves, and he punches the wall, and it's raining in Los Angeles for some reason, and he gets on the bus, you just like, we always referred to it as almost our homage to the end of The Graduate, and it's a very sad scene. And when this happens, the voiceover came about via Ilya in editing, and the whole, I hope these guys like hospital. When I heard that, I just lost it. Like, that's just awesome.
Yeah, I could see the movie without voiceover. Like, so, and it's great because voiceover is sometimes a crutch, but it's funny because, like, if you didn't have that, we still know he's going to kick their ass. But it was actually a way to sneak in a laugh. And the line of "I hope these guys like hospital food" was great. And it wasn't overused by any means because it wasn't used really to explain story details.
Yeah, I mean, again, I say this in everything I do, but it's like best idea wins. Iron sharpens iron. And when you look at some of the things when you're on set and someone has that,
and it wasn't overused by any means because it wasn't used really to explain story details.
Yeah, I mean, again, I say this in everything I do, but it's like best idea wins. Iron sharpens iron. And when you look at some of the things when you're on set and someone has that look, and would have that look, and you'd be like, you say it, and then you'd say, you're like, oh, let's give that a try. And I think that's what ended up happening, because, dude, when I saw the trailer for the first time, it's one of my favorite memories of my entire life, because it took us 5 years. It's this tiny little movie that could, right? And we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just making a cool fucking wheel, right? And Bob called me. He's like, have you seen the trailer? And I was like, no. And he's like, I'll send you a link. Put me on speaker. We're watching it together. And it was him and I watching that Red Band trailer and just cackling. So I think that energy is key,
Well, and it's interesting because that bus scene brings us to like the undoing, of the movie. Like if he wasn't in that bad mood and wanting to fight, he would have just kept going on his regular path. But he wanted to kind of reactivate himself to an extent. And my daughter was kind of like, well, what did those guys really do? Like, did they deserve to be put in the hospital because they were creepy? Because I was like, look, they're drunk drivers, so fuck them forever, just for that, just for starters. Like, drunk drivers, come on, get a freaking Uber. It's like you get a taxi even in the old days. Like, don't drink and drive and put other people at risk. Like, no need for it. But beyond that, like, yeah, they were threatening when they walk on the bus. But it's interesting because he just wanted to see if they would push back, and they do. Was the way that I explained it, and that's basically the basis of your story, in which you have this affinity for the Russian mob and all the,
by the way, like,
and all their extravagancies, and they happen to be Russian mob connected. So tell us when that story moment occurred to you that, oh yeah, the way that this guy is going to he's tangling with the Russian mob, and they're
that's just so funny is in the original, it's not a Russian mob, it's just a mob, right? And when Ilya got on board, he's like, oh no, it's got to be a Russian mob. They're fucking cool, and you did such a great job with them in John Wick. Like, dude, Russian mob, right? And of course, when he cast, now look his name up, I always forget it, Alexei, right? As the bad guy, he was like, yeah, great, And when you think of the bus scene, that was always in there because we thought of, to me, the best action scenes in anything are intimate, very small, Like, Taken's a weird movie, but I love it like the rest of us. But when he finally gets into that room with the guys, makes them say the name on the matchbox, and And he said, I told you I'd find you. And Nat goes down like, oh shit, right? And then of course, old boy, the raid, and all those kinds of things. And what we liked about the bus was that scene where the bad guy is going to do bad things to that young woman, potentially. They make the bus driver pull over. She gets out. Bob's the last. Bob is about to step off. He closes the door, steps back. What are you going to do, old man? And he empties the gun. He's like, I'll fuck you up. And my favorite memory in regards to that line is I watched that little Dolby theater in Burbank somewhere, right, with the post-production crew that had seen that movie 70 times, you know? And one of those guys, like, the movies he'd worked on, he could geek out for that. And when he says that line, that guy chuckled, you know? And you're just like, yeah, because it's working, you know?
It's a great moment, and it's an amazing scene. I'm curious how your action looks on the page, because you have a good knack of being very intimate with your locations. And, you know, there's everything from the poles that you would use to hold on to when you're riding the bus that are used as weapons, but also, especially, I was cracked up when the stop wire was used to strangle someone, and the bell is dinging for, like, next stop, please.
That stuff's in the script, and a lot of that stuff though is because once Ilya was attached, we did a deep dive, right? But a lot of that's Daniel too, man. A lot of that's that second. And they're just geniuses. But
Did you have that wire motor in your script?
that was in there. They grabbed the bottle, the leg. It was always in there. Was using a knife, and because the one guy's throat is crushed.
I was going to bring that up.
Threw the straw through. You know,
For the
just
youngins out there was a television show called ER way back in the day, and there was a very special episode where somebody's trach was messed up, and George Clooney was the young, you know, doctor who was reckless, and he's like using a pin tube, and he's using a razor, and he's like giving air to somebody's trach tube, and it's just a great kicker to your scene in which you know nobody walks up and he like takes a knife across this guy's trach who can't breathe, and he takes a soda straw and like, or was it a soda straw? Yeah, and like just allows this guy to breathe, and like that was a funny kicker as well, and that was.
Okay, I need to grab some sort of flesh tone for these guys. Okay, well, if I'll return. I'm not interested in This feels tonally appropriate.
In your script too, right? Is the character?
Oh yeah, because the other thing too is we wanted, like, Indiana Jones is sort of one of the most perfect characters ever because he loses the entire movie and wins at the end, but he loses everything, right? And what we just wanted to show with Hutch is like he didn't, at the beginning of the fight, gets his ass handed to him, right? And really, it comes down to he has more will than him, and he's rusty. And once he gets moving, progressively he becomes a better fighter, especially with that home siege, you know. But when he does that, you have that expression of like, I don't want to kill anyone, and that's why he does it, you know. But we wanted to show that he wasn't quite there. But as soon as they attack him at his home, the classic, you don't do that. Now he's, you know, the classic John Wick. You know, people keep asking me if I'm back. Yeah.
So what was it like when you sat down with Ilya, when he came on? Because you said you did a deep dive with him. Were you guys getting into storyboards together? Was there a rewrite? Any big notes that you remember from him?
No, huge rewrites. You know, huge rewrites. But like his bones, the bones were always there. The foundation and character were always there. But then you look at the realities of the budget. You look at the realities of the shoot day and availability and all that kind of stuff. Things are perpetually changing. But we both loved the script so much to change it. You know. And to craft it and to just, I believe every script should be malleable, you know, even up to the day of. And so it was really making sure that this script wasn't mine or his, but ours, you know. And when you look at that movie, it is a pretty wide cast net of ours, you know. Every voice was heard, and even on the days of shooting, ideas would come up from the least likely sources to make a good scene better. So, you know, it was just kind of like not changing for changing's sake, but going, this is a great scene. Could it be better? You know, this is a cool idea. Could it be better? And it was never second guessing ourselves. It was just really, like I said before, working with Ilya was iron sharpens iron. And I never, you know, of course you get frustrated because you're tired. I mean, but it was always like, you hear a good idea. It should be, God damn it, it's 10 hours of work, but it's a better idea. Yeah,
it's cool. You know, another thing, like you saying that you love James Bond, obviously, you have like little, just very subtle, you know, gadgets here. You have a two-way radio that's a old stereo where he's talking to RZA in the beginning, and even when he's ready to destroy his house, I know I'm skipping forward. We'll get to that in a second, but he puts on a certain record, and the record player literally starts sparking, so that the room is going to go on to fire. It was a nice effect. It was simple, so simple. Where did some of those ideas come about on the page, just for these simple pieces of tech that you were putting in there that were still kind of cool?
Yeah, I think a lot of times I really like the characters that are analog, but they're comfortable in a digital world, right? And that's what, you know, and again, to that point, what Bond did so well is his best gadgets were very simple. Like, you know, they got kind of, sometimes they got too sci-fi for me, but every now and then where it's like a watch that does that thing, a pen that does that thing, all of that's great. But the world building of like those old, you know, noirish spy tradecraft movies, East Germany, West Germany, of, you know, there's a fake brick, you know, there's a bar, but then it has another bar behind it, and then, ooh, the speakeasy, all that kind of stuff. That's where you get to geek out, because even when you get down to the secret space, you kind of want to wonder, is there a door in the backyard, in the background of this one? And that's what, you know, that's what our favorite, you know, story franchises, worlds do. They encourage you to keep thinking, you know, which as a kid who grew up with Star Wars, you know, watching The Mandalorian, it's kind of like, you know, oh, that's what we were talking about when I was 11 or 12. You know, like, oh, dude, they did that thing. Holy shit, that guy's back. Oh, man. You know, you kind of geek out. And I think also realizing that in the world of James Bond's cool. But, like, he's got M and Q and Felix Leiter and the you know, the women that are arguably more badass than he is. That's always the ironic thing. But it's just also realizing that your lead character is important, sure, but he's only as cool as the world he inhabits. You know,
Julian as an antagonist was really cool, and it was good that, you know, you separated him from the John Wick kind of villains, in which he's a bit more out there, because we are first introduced to him as a singer, right? And one of his cohorts brings up, like, you know, hey, great song, but how are we going to trust you with our money? And he just walks up and kills somebody, you know, and it's going to add more to their shares of this, you know, big money collective that he's involved with. Tell us about the development of Julian as a character, because there is a complexity to him in which he kind of wants to get out.
Yeah.
And it's something that actually is offered later by nobody, when, you know, in a sense of the movie that I can name that came before that did this, The Dark Knight, you know, like, all of their money is burnt to the ground. And and nobody basically tells him, like, look, this is your chance to get out.
Yeah.
If you want to get out, we could both walk away just fine, and you can figure out a way to rebuild. But Julian's a fascinating character, and very comical, sadistic as well.
You know, it's weird. It's a weird movie to bring up in this regards, but a lot of that relationship, that moment in the bar, and that character came from Schindler's List, where you had that moment with Schindler.
I didn't see us going there, but okay.
You know, but this is why you had that moment where Schindler meets with the bad Nazi, they're all bad, but, like, you know, the big bad, right?
Ray Fiennes.
Yeah, Ray Fiennes, and he talks about forgiveness, you know, and then you have that scene where Ray is in front of the mirror and goes, "I forgive you," you know, "I forgive you," and then he ends up shooting that kid. Right? It's super, super dark, but that conversation is interesting because you wonder if he in that moment was on the cusp, you know.
Of almost understanding, right?
Yeah, and that's what we wanted with Bob going, look, man, like, you don't like this life. I didn't like it. I got out. You want to be a singer in your own little cabaret? That was always where that character went. And of course, because of time and the way these movies go, it just rendered down a bit. But, like, we always loved the idea that he wants out. He's got this art collection. Doesn't need money anymore. He doesn't want to babysit the fucking Op Shack, you know? And yet, for the
listeners, the Op Shack is the name of all the money collective that he's in charge of guarding for that month or whatever period of time.
That's all he owe you, man. He knew that, the realities of that. And I was like, that's cool.
That is cool. Well, what was it before? What was it before that? Was he just...
Same kind of thing. Yeah, honestly, same kind of thing. Same kind of Dark Knight of it all, right? But he knew of that, and suddenly it was like, that's a cool layer. Like, that's a cool, like, hint at what could be. But, you know, to me, the best villains are, you know, when you look at, you say Joubert from, Max von Sydow, 3 Days in the Conor, he's gentle, he's kind, and if he doesn't have a contract on you, you're safe, you know. But then you look at, Thanos is the greatest example. He's kind of got a point, you know. You look at what was Michael B. Jordan's character from Black Panther, but he's kind of got a point, you know.
Yes.
Where it's like, I know he's the big bad, but, like,
they have to believe in what they're doing to be able to do it, even though it is wacky. Because, I mean, Thanos, like, you know, they cut through his argument pretty fast.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
And it's crazy. The thing about Julian, though, is just like, even his sadism is cartoonish. Because aside from that scene in the bar, the next scene when he realizes the people beat up on the bus were, you know, his younger brother, I believe. And his introduction into the hospital is a door opens and he throws a lounge chair at somebody in a hospital bed. And it was just, like you shouldn't be laughing, but like it was like even my like little daughter was laughing because it's so cartoonish.
Yeah.
Like you like it's so like on the list of things you don't do in a hospital.
Yeah.
Throw a chair at someone's head that's in a hospital bed. And we've seen the hospital scenes a million times where, you know, somebody's knee is up and they're pulling on the weights and whatever. Like those things we've seen. This one, I got to give you credit, man. That was some brand new crazy right there.
You know, it's funny though, is when you talk about that scene when Bob meets with Julian, right? At Hutch and Julian. And you can tell that Julian's really on the fence, you know, of like, you know, maybe I can leave, all that kind of stuff. Bob and Ilya's favorite scene in when we talked about it, and I totally understand why, is when Bob leaves and gets in his car and he's waiting. Yes. And then when Julian, the guys come out, he gives this look of like, oh, good. Like they're coming after me. It's like, that to me is full on genre. Like, oh, that speech, it was true. It's from his heart. But he really wanted the bad guy to come for him, you know?
Yeah, I couldn't decide, actually, because I was clocking that look. And I couldn't decide if he was, like, disappointed, like, oh, buddy, you made the wrong choice. I'm going to just have to end you now. Like, yeah. It was a good scene. I mean, but that's funny that, like, he wanted it, because that is about where he is in the movie. Your music choices were great. And
that's Ilya, man. I mean, honestly, I'm a big fan of anytime you use a song that's known or has a certain affinity towards some kind of scene, you use it elsewhere. And I might have put a couple of songs in there that were $1 million we could use, you know? And he came up with a lot of those that are just genius.
I mean, Ilya had great choices because it's anachronistic. You know, it's going against the type of what you associate with the song and showing it like in a violent moment. Did you know if they had any trouble clearing those rights, knowing that it was going to be used in?
Well, I think it was because we're the little production that could. It was finding songs that were available for a pennies on the dollar. Like that. Okay. You know? But you know, one of the ones we brought up is I love the first Kingsman and how they used Casey the Sunshine Band, right? And awesome. You know, it's like using that kind of stuff.
There's the blending here that we've seen in these type of movies before for a man of action who's retired of you know, it comes to his home. And it was cool the way he kind of locks his family into this, like, you know, safety room, you know, panic room in the basement. And he just goes to the house and has it out with everybody and is, you know, definitely taking care of business in his house. And it's interesting, though, because it brings us to this whole concept of what is the story in your mind between him and his wife? Yeah. Because in the beginning, they're sleeping with a big-ass pillow between them. She doesn't really respect him. You kind of get that sense in the beginning of, like, you know, before you realize he's a man of action, if you haven't seen the trailer somehow, that she's disappointed in him. And, you know, there's a lot of vibes going there, and we actually never really saw it.
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
Respect him when he has his call to action. She does respect that, but it's very unclear. You know, she clearly knows how to dress severe wounds. She's using medical glue to stitch him up, so she knows what she's doing. But
well, you know, it's kind of like, we'll tune in next week. We'll get to that. But what we didn't want to do is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We want to do more of, you know, she is outside of life. They still love each other, but there is this world between them. Just life happens, time happens, things happen, you know? We never wanted to craft a character that you hated because we've seen that way too many times. She's trying and he's trying and they're just missing each other. So when these things go down, it's kind of like an opening to that bridge where you're like, I've missed you too. Like there's the unspoken of all of these things, you know? And yeah, it's a surprise to them, but at the same time, there's the hint at, you know, none of us are quite who we are. She was awesome, and can't wait to see more.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.interesting and his experience. You can follow out and rent Nobody wherever you watch me.
Originally, because I had met him and I'm doing some stuff with him, it was like, you know, let's get someone like Stormy K. Brown, right? But once someone said RZA, and we heard his voice, like, yeah, I can't unsee that. So RZA, right? And the nicest guy in the world, and fucking great in that role. And he and Bob clicked. The movie is about family, you know, about him trying to save his own, while his father, you know, come on. Christopher Lloyd.
Right. I love the character of the father. Tell me about creating that, because it was very funny to have him in an old age home. It's also a trope of the retired dad. But like it was a great trope, and Christopher Lloyd rocked it.
And in fact, the scene that got the biggest rise out of me was, the bus scene, of course, because you get to finally see this thing that you worked so hard on. But that scene where the two Russian guys come into the room, one of who is Ilya, that's his cameo, right? And and he's quote unquote sleeping, and it's revealed that he has a shotgun in his lap. And that look he gives, I lost my shit, because Ilya's blown and folded and and then the guy comes down, he's listening, he's watching the Western on high while he's choking a guy. Like, that to me is the funnest you can have in grindhouse genre.
It was the silliest thing because yes, like we've shown the security guard is asleep both times that we see the facility, and we've shown that Christopher Lloyd's character is watching these loud Westerns. And these two guys come in, and he just has this shotgun under a blanket, and like just does the.
He gives this look. He gives the Christopher Lloyd look.
Yeah, and then the guy runs in, and like the characters are just out of frame from the guy's vision. So turn the TV down. Again, comedy with action to just remind us that this isn't a terrible onslaught. It's a silly movie.
What I wanted to do too, and this is always just the beginning, is like, dude, dad loves son, son loves dad, brother loves brother, brother loves, all those kind of things where at the end, they know shit's going down, so they're going to help. Yeah. They show up, right off in the sunset, yes, I want to see more of them,
The fact that you show him and, young RZA in a picture and that they're brothers, like, it's just like a throwaway. Like, if somebody's glancing away, like, they wouldn't see it, but it was just like that other little touch of exposition. That shows that they're part of a family dynamic that was fun. And by the way, only because we're sitting here talking about RZA, I'm just saying this to anyone in the world that's tuning in iTunes or Spotify or watching this on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. I've had the pleasure not once but twice of seeing RZA live score the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, which is just a great karate flick, and he's obsessed with it. So he does a full live score of it. That is like an experience in and of itself, and it adds to the movie. And unfortunately, the problem is, from everything I've ascertained, because I've actually wanted to interview him about it, he's using so many clips of so many other pieces of music that it's almost impossible to clear them all to ever release these two things together. So it's just a live performance that he seems to do, or at least he was before the pandemic, maybe once every 2 years. He was at least coming through LA, and I know some other cities, but if you ever have a chance to see it, and Derek, like, even for you, like, if you ever have a chance to see it, you'll be blown away. Just like a side note, taking notes, tell me if there was a good note that you really remember getting from Ilya, and also from the other silent partner in your life, Sonia. Because
Sonia,
during John Wick 2, you talked a lot about your wife, Sonia.
But she's the line of first defense, man. She reads everything I do before it goes to Mike and Josh, which is agent and manager, who I've been with forever and her family and friend. She's the first draft. They're the second draft. Cheryl and Debbie, which is part of Mike's team, is the third draft. And then by the time I turn in the script, it's the fourth or fifth draft, But in regards to their notes, Sonia's is always like, look, man, read this scene outline. That reads like a horror scene, violent-wise. And, when you're in the mood, you're just like, type the word behead. And you're like, maybe not that, right? And then with Ilya, man, when it came to music, when it came to tone, when it came to being a partner in the world of build, and what we would both do was kind of going, let's not go too far in either way in action. You can have a horror movie once in a movie, right? Anything more than that, it becomes its own genre, and it's kind of tough, And so for us and for him, dude, that, like I said, that last siege on the warehouse wasn't really written, and it was kind of emails to him back and I during production, and like, dude, I think it was his idea, it wasn't mine, with the mousetraps. Fucking cool. In every draft, you had the gun in the frozen food, But a lot of
There's a gun put in there earlier by Uncle Charlie.
Yeah.
It's put in the refrigerator, and because it's the place that nobody works. It's his place of business. He's been.
Was it like vegetarian burritos are in there or something? You know, you eat. And so a lot of that, a lot of that stuff. You know, that's what I loved about Dave and Chad. You know, what I love about Ilya is they get their hands dirty in the action. You know, they in their head they see it all, and so some of the tools that Hutch uses there at the end, Ilya's idea. You know, in building it out. So,
well, tell us about that for a second, because you know it is the conventional ending of like Shoot Out at a Factory, right? It's the classic convention of action films, and basically here I'm curious what did exist on the page, because you sold this draft, you set it up, and you're right, like there's like mouse traps being used that are very elaborate. I barely understood what some of them did, but I got it. Like I understood like. It is connected to a stapler. So when someone presses the staple on that desk, something's going to happen. There's a hand grenade that is being smashed down by, some sort of press. How detailed did you get, and what did your production draft look like?
I tend to get really detailed in that kind of stuff. But on that one, it was Ilya's notebook, and it's him working directly going, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And me going, cool, and geeking out with him, right?
You had to have something in there when the draft sold. So I'm just curious, tell us what it was. Like, what was in your draft that sold?
It was probably because that was when we got to draft, we went so fast. It was probably a couple of lines like, hey, because most of the time I like to write action. I like to write chases, That was, here we got the siege. And he's going to use, we always had the whole, he buys the warehouse, he's going to work on all this stuff. You don't quite know what he's doing, and then you see it. But when it came time to actually determine what it was he was doing, they were well in the production, man. That's Ilya and the magic of that whole production team, He would call me and we'd talk through certain things, with the Claymore. That was always in the script as the format, a lot of that stuff was like, it'd be cool. Great, we don't have another idea. Go do that cool thing.
Well, he has the Claymore in his meeting with Julian earlier, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
And obviously having text is printed face front towards me. Sells what that thing is, even if you don't know. Would the piece of glass that he used as a shield protect him on the backside of a Claymore, which expands outward? I mean, technically, technically it could.
If Tom Cruise can use it in Edge of Tomorrow and be okay, covered in alien goo, I figured we were okay. But that was Ilya's idea, and I really liked it because the classic, like, this device I used as a little bit of a fulcrum in the moment is now all I have left and running towards the bad guy. And what's funny is the scene isn't him. He knows that it's not a suicide run, but it's a risk, and that was our horror moment. The way that goes off, and fun. It's just like, to your point, man. If someone says to me, "Is like, nobody's pretty wild and wacky," you're like, "Fuck yeah!" What's the point? Did you have a good time? Because even when you read some of these reviews, and they're like, having a great time, and in the middle they're like, "Is it a good movie?" No. Yeah, I mean, but I loved it, and why did you put that line in? Like, we look at the movies I loved as a kid and still love now. Yes, they're fucking fun.
I mean, it was fun. My wife refuses to watch any serious movie whatsoever with violence lately. And, like, she just sat down and she's like, well, I love Bob Odenkirk. And I'm like, yes, but, like, he is violent here. So what? Because I was trying to understand why her and my daughter were so fine with nobody. Strangely, my 14-year-old son was, like, upstairs, wasn't even interested. So I'll never understand that one. But because me as a kid, I would totally have been into it. But, I mean, it is fun, and it is comic booky, and it gives you a step removed from the violence by making it zany.
Yeah,
and I think
that's the thing. Is like there is this element of we're all having fun here, and at the same time, you want to see a part of yourself in that character. You don't want to go too far down. You don't want them to deal with too many dark things, or the bad guy go too dark. Like I just, in a day and age where we all have the streamers. Right, and a new movie comes on, and you're like, "Cool, 2 hours and 40 minutes," and you're like, "Just the director's cut from the late '80s?" No, it's the first cut. That for us was like, dude, 90 minutes. And you're like, oh, yes. And then on Tuesday over lunch, you're like, gonna watch it? Yeah. It was like, that's what I watch, that's what I love, and that's my joy. And so come the end of it, it's a guy that you want to hang out with. There are a lot of characters that we watch their movies, you're like, he's probably a dick if he was my neighbor, but you'd hang out with Hutch because he's fucking Bob Odenkirk.
Exactly. You've set up what could be a franchise. I hope it is. We're in strange times with the pandemic, people not exactly going to movies, people discovering it on their own. So I don't know how the studios are financially tracking what obligations need to be met to launch into a franchise. Tell us about your ending. Coming up with this ending where they win, they're looking at a new house somewhere else.
Her line, that was Ilya. And I thought it was great.
Because her line is like, does it have a basement?
It has a basement, right? And we always had, in the original script for the longest time, it was his father-in-law and his brother-in-law and everyone having breakfast together. And then you had the RV. And then it was him, his father, his brother driving off. And the inside is full of art and cash. Like, in other words, the idea that they didn't burn all of it, right? And they're off to, because, there's this idea that they owe someone something, right? And they were going to drive off in the sunset. But the reality was kind of going like, yeah, but he reconnected with everyone, So that's, to Ilya's point, it became Christopher Lloyd and RZA driving off. And to me, like, I've already pitched the beginning of the second one, and it's very similar to the tone of what I said at the beginning of this interview of, like, buy me a ticket on an airplane. And everyone's reaction is like, awesome. What's the movie about? I'm like, I don't know. But to me, look, you got Endgame because you had Iron Man. I want to stick with the intimate, and everyone's talking about what this franchise will be, what the sequel will be, and I want it to be just a little bit bigger. If we can get Ilya and everybody a little bit of a bump, more importantly, some time. You look at that bus scene. I want to do scenes like that. Love the Fast and Furious of it all. Love the Jack Reacher of it all. But I would rather have the Atomic Blonde where she beats the shit out of guys in the car than a full-on race which costs money. So where this goes from here, however long Bob wants to do this, I'm in. But I also don't want him to abandon his family in the movie. I want them to be a part of his mission, but I don't want them to be like, now he's part of their team. Like, no, there's going to be that kind of stainless steel divide. And yet, like, the most important thing to him is his son, his daughter, his wife, and the kitty cat bracelet. And what that kitty cat bracelet is, really, that could be fun. Like, I don't know. You think of those things. You see the picture of them as kids. There's a part of me going like, it's not just that,
Yeah, well, I would love to know more about that. I mean, like, it could be a comic book series, it could be a TV series. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do with it. When did you decide that you were going to abandon the kitty cat bracelet? Because it was so funny that in the middle of the movie, he just finds it under the couch. That incited him to all this violence. He's like, oh, those people didn't steal it. Jeez, it was just
that was always the way of it. We loved it because, like, that's what set him off was the kitty cat bracelet, and it had been misplaced, right? But you look at those little pieces, little icons, like the marker from John Wick. John Wick 2 changed any number of times, but the marker always stayed, right?
Yeah.
And I always loved the book in the Indiana Jones Last Crusade that his father's notebook. Those kinds of elements. We did seed them in the script, and we did seed them in the movie. We don't quite exactly know what that picture, that kitty cat, that thing is, but we left it open. Like, it could be more than that. It could be that, or what's more exciting, especially the bracelet, is no, it's just his kid's thing, and that's what set him off. And to be honest, if there was a fire in your house and it was just you, and you had a second to grab something of value, it's probably that thing that's worthless, but it's worth everything to you. And that's kind of it.
Rewrites during production. I know you were on set for a while. Was there anything specific that you needed to rewrite?
No, on this one, no. Because by that point, I mean, you're a lean production. You have gone through this any number of times with Bob and Ilya and the producers in the studio that order for it to work, you have to engineer no breathing room, you know? And so, yeah, there were elements of dialogue or, hey, is it okay if they say this? And at that point, like, you don't have to ask me that. I'm like, yes, you know, like, that kind of thing. But, you know, I don't care how well or maintained and managed the production is. You're going to find that yourself at that moment with a lot of time where
Why does this dry so
that's when the
fast?
magic happens, you know? And dude, like, I didn't do any heavy lifting during the shoot because all of the heavy lifting had been done beforehand. And of course, with anything, once it's in that, you know, the can, then there's a different kind of heavy lift after.
Editing is the last stage of storytelling. Are there any scenes that you really missed that they needed to go?
You know, honestly, it's the one I told you about the archives, you know, and the guy going downstairs.
Okay.
Missed that.
But that was never shot, so.
It was never shot, you know.
So
but when it comes to editing, no, there's nothing off the top of my head right now. There's no scene that they shot that isn't in there, you know. And I mean, there is. Don't get me wrong, but like when you think of that sequence of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a lot was shot for that because we didn't quite understand the pacing. We knew it was going to be too long in the tooth. But when the editors did what they did, it was like, look, you couldn't have gotten to that 15-second sequence without rewriting what we're trying to do in those 20 pages. And, you know, I could be hurt saying, like, oh, it didn't make it to screen. It's like, no, it did. And it gave the producer, it gave the editors what they needed to do that awesome sequence. And you have to look at it going like, oh, man, I didn't see that. Good job. Awesome. Better.
You know, I know we're running out of time here. Like, so, you know, a couple last questions, but what was your toughest scene? What was the scene that you kept coming back to again and again on the page that you were having trouble cracking, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge? How did you crack it?
When you think of the relationship with his wife, like since day one, it was like, you don't want the audience to think she's a cold, callous, selfish bitch. You know, it was all of their scenes together. And what we also didn't want to have is that moment where you shift gears and you're in a different kind of genre of a movie, right? We wanted to have their interactions be rendered down to full-on subtext, and that there's more to what they're saying than what they really are. And we wanted to make sure that there's a balance that these are two people who love each other and still do, and yet there's a role between all of their scenes together for as little runtime is. That's where the lion's share work went. And the dialogue scenes between our big bad and our hero, we spent a lot of time with that. You know, but the rest, when it comes to action, man, that's where you know Ilya, Dave, and I are just like, oh, you know, what do you want? Like I mean, this is the cinematic heroine of our youth. You know, we all have what I call as the back pocket ideas that you've been doodling since you were a kid, and someone's like, you know, we should have a fight here, and I'm like, I've been waiting years for you to bring that up. I have an idea, you know.
What could you tell us about how your action looks on the page? There's a problem sometimes people get when they write detailed action scenes because there's no dialogue, and you know the reader actually has to read in a script.
Yeah, no, I write them out, but I'll also, it's kind of like you bookend it. So you begin with that first move. You know, grabs the wrist, snaps the arm, knife the neck, takes out the knee, snaps. You know, you can do that kind of sequence that allows the audience or the reader to go like, oh, I saw all of that. And then it's like you use things like operatic or whirling dervish of death or gives as good as he gets. Like, you know, and you gotta be careful like Arturo sprays and beheadings, and then you're in the horror genre. And then you end with that last kill in the scene of being completely orchestrated. But you know, what Dave and Chad have always said is the best action scenes, they cap at 45 seconds long. You know, anything longer than that. And again, I understand what they're saying, you know, is you want it to be like, you need to hold your breath, and then you get air at 45 seconds or a minute or whatever it is, and everything changes. But like when you think your favorite action scenes, like I bring it up all the time, but Die Hard with a Vengeance, when he kills the dirty cops in the elevator, it's an awesome scene. It's fast, it's bloody, it's gross, and yet you're like, oh, you know. Or the classic Colin Firth and Kingsman, you know, manners make it man. It's a fast scene, but it's fucking fun, right? Two different genres, you know. I mean, action genres, but you have the surreal notion versus the more grounded approach, and yet they roar.
You're also on Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I mean, tell us what's going on next. You know, what's that experience been like? I know that's a podcast in and of itself, but like, have you enjoyed like dealing with somebody else's IP and kind of being able to have the, you know, a different world to turn to that you didn't have to completely create because part of it's created, but at the same time, there's a lot of world building to do.
As a kid, being a fan of Marvel, being a fan of DC, being a fan of comic books in general, to be able to play in that world, to be able to walk into the Marvel offices past the different Iron Man suits through ungodly security, to work on something that I knew of quite well when I was a kid was a dream, you know. And that room, run by, you know, the creator Malcolm Spellman, was my first real TV experience in the room. And it was warm, and it was encouraging, and it was joyful. I mean, it was fast and furious. It was hard, but dude, when you think of the first experience I had on a TV show was that. Color myself blessed, man. Just, it was an absolute joy and delight.
I've only seen one episode, as the rest of the world has, because you know, we'll see the second episode tomorrow night. But I love what I've seen. Is there something else percolating? I mean, this took 5 years to get made. Is there something else that has been on your back burner that you're trying to bring to life that you want to tell us about?
So many things.
Okay.
No, here's the thing. Is like, you know, I've got this. There's any number of things. Like, we should really do have a follow-up podcast about everything else. But like, it's funny because you work hard to get to the point where you get to work hard, and that's where we are. And yet at the same time, you have to say no to things that aren't quite you. And you know, I've got Just Cause. You know, I've got Hitman. I've got Booker. I've got, you know, there are 30 things that I want to tell you right now that I don't think I can. So I'm just going to go like, yes, there's a lot of really cool shit. By the way, it's across the spectrum. There's stuff with actors that I love and respect, and have, like, you're going to be surprised in the next couple of weeks who's going to do the nobody type thing, who's going to do the John Wick type thing. And yet they're helping me build the sandbox. They're familiar with Sam, they're playing. But there's Benny and the Ink Machine is another one. I don't know if you know that video game, but I'm adapting it for TV with Ian Goldberg, and that's an absolute delight.
That's cool.
And you know, there's so many things, man. But like, again, I've gotten to the point where I get to, like, as Lance Reddick says, I get to do cool shit. I am.
Well, look, I really enjoyed Nobody. It was very silly. It was violence that was so cartoony that it was just fascinating to watch the different setups and payoffs of what was happening. Yes, we live in a violent society, but things like this are almost a release because you see the bad guys get what's coming to them, which is a story that people always love, you know? So I mean, kudos to you on another job well done, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks for your time, Derek.
Dude, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriter Derek Kolstad for being so generous with his time and really giving a great chat about what it took to bring his latest script to the screen, Nobody. And remember, folks, you could go watch Nobody by renting it on Amazon or renting it on iTunes or watching it through on demand on your cable box. And I highly recommend that you do. It's a fun little flick, and it's highly entertaining. And while you're surfing around online, I also hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. If you've never read us before, you could read our entire free issue, and you could check us out. It's like you'll be able to test drive us. You can also read us through the Backstory iPad app. You can read the free issue there as well. And if you like what you've read, there's so much to explore. You can read our table of contents, see what else is inside, and you could even become a subscriber. That's right. I'm going to give you a discount coupon code to do it. You could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You need to use that code over at backstory.net, but your login credentials at backstory.net will also get you into our iPad app as well. So fear not, you'll be able to do that too. But look, it would mean a lot to me to have my Spotify and iTunes podcast listeners, and also the people who are watching all of these interviews as Zooms over at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would mean a lot to me to have all of you become subscribers, or as many of you as you can, because there's so much great content. I know if you dig this podcast that you'll dig Backstory Magazine, so thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Kids, if you want to reach out to me, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm Yo Goldsmith on Twitter. I also run the Backstory_mag page on Twitter. And I do the same thing on Instagram. You can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram, or also, of course, the Backstory_mag page on Instagram as well. And look, you can always email me as yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I promise I won't get back to you immediately. I know I always say that. It's because I mean it. But I will do my best. I'm a pretty easy guy to find. I check my Facebook fan page maybe once a week or something like that. I'll try and get better about it. I'm just not on Facebook as much. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A. It's important to me to have all of you become subscribers, or as many of you as you can, because there's so much great content. I know if you dig this podcast that you'll dig Backstory Magazine, so thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Kids, if you want to reach out to me, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm Yo Goldsmith on Twitter. I also run the Backstory_mag page on Twitter. And I do the same thing on Instagram. You can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram, or also, of course, the Backstory_mag page on Instagram as well. And look, you can always email me as yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I promise I won't get back to you immediately. I know I always say that. It's because I mean it. But I will do my best. I'm a pretty easy guy to find. I check my Facebook fan page maybe once a week or something like that. I'll try and get better about it. I'm just not on Facebook as much. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Until next week. We live in a chaotic world in uncertain times, and as today's movie point Their assignment was to take a book that chronicles one of history's more controversial characters and turn it into a TV series. And by the way, they did it flawlessly. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I'm extremely excited to have with me today co-writer and co-creator of the series, Mark Richard, to talk about his WGA-nominated TV show, The Good Lord Bird. And wow, what a pleasure it was to watch The Good Lord Bird. I mean, this is a very entertaining television show, but it is feeding you real history in a very digestible fashion, to the point that you just can't wait to see what happens next. And sometimes you cannot believe your eyes, in which some of the stranger parts of history are the truer parts. Of course, it goes without saying that some of the themes of racism that are observed in the show, just as they plagued the nation way back then, still plague the nation now, which makes The Good Lord Bird even more relevant as a great piece of television. And John Brown is such an amazing character to chronicle. Ethan Hawke did just a brilliant job with his depiction of John Brown, his writing of John Brown in this adaptation. And look, I cannot say enough good things about this show. And I want to say, even if you have not yet seen The Good Lord Bird, you can still definitely listen to the non-spoiler section and understand everything we're talking about. And you'll probably understand most of the spoiler section as well. But look, if you could get it through Showtime and you could watch The Good Lord Bird, I highly recommend it. It completely deserved its WGA nomination for television. It's just got some excellent writing in it. Without a doubt, Mark was an excellent guest who had a lot of interesting things to say about his creative process and what it took to make this show, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, you can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You know, one of the things that we're doing in Backstory Magazine is we're getting screenplays out there that are unproduced by writers of note. In this issue, you could see Simon Kinberg's first screenplay that he sold right out of college, and also a Joe Carnahan screenplay that he wrote with his brother, Matthew Michael Carnahan, that he's been trying to make for a decade. He even gave us concept art. You could read both of those entire screenplays and interviews with the screenwriters about how they would see them as a movie and the lessons that they learned writing them. I hope you check out our table of contents over at Backstory.net. And you know, even if you've never read us, you can test drive us by reading the free issue. You can read an entire issue over there. And if you like us, I hope you'll consider subscribing. And you can save $5 off your subscription with coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. You enter it at Backstory.net. It'll give you access on your desktop or laptop, or you could use those same credentials to sign into your iPad app as well. But look, it would mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and YouTube watchers support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with co-creator and co-writer Mark Richard about his television show, The Good Lord Bird. Okay, Mark, it's fantastic to see you. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having us on the show.
Well, I'm really excited because honestly, I was completely in awe watching The Good Lord Bird, and I was so glad that it got WGA nominated. It truly deserves it. What you guys did is so innovative. And you know, the first part of the interview obviously is going to be non-spoiler. We're going to give our viewers on YouTube and our listeners and Spotify and iTunes just a sense of who you are and where you come from. So I think my easiest question is, at what point in your life did you know that you wanted to be a filmmaker?
Well, it's not an easy answer. I spent a lot of time in our movie theater house in my little town. The projectionist lived on my street, and he would walk to the theater. It's a very small southern town. And
where was it, Mark?
In Franklin, Virginia, in Southampton County. And if I went with him to help open up the theater, I could watch the movies for free, although I had to sit up in what they called then the colored balcony, which tells you a lot about our town.
Right.
But that was also where the party was often, you know. So, but I didn't really, I made a couple of films in college, but I didn't ever really consider a career in filmmaking.
Where'd you go to school?
Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, which are undergoing a lot of agonizing questions about whether or not to keep their name or to change their name. Both.
Yes, I was there once. There once. It's far outside city limits would be the way to describe that place. I was there in my 20s with a friend that went there, and we went to visit him, and I'm Jeff Goldsmith. That's the way I was born and raised. But I was definitely Jeff. I was Jeff Smith in that little town because I couldn't get a read on it.
It was, you know, a very small private college, and you had to wear a coat and tie to class. And you know, I grew up in a public school in the county, and I show up in bib overalls listening to the Allman Brothers, and you know, these guys are listening to beach music and, you know, come from all this money. And I never really, you know, you find your own little clique. So I found a bunch of guys who they didn't fit in either. But I got a great education. The teachers were really good, small classes. And I had some good writing teachers, including Jim Boatwright, who was the editor of Shenandoah magazine. Shenandoah is a literary magazine from WNL. And then I just kind of I goofed around, and I had misspent 20s. I worked on commercial fishing boats for 3 years. I sold real estate. I sold seafood. Sold driftwood. Was a newspaper reporter, naval correspondent for the Norfolk, Virginia pilot paper. And writing was something I could do, but it wasn't like creative writing wasn't it. But then about that time, minimalist writers were making a heyday, you know, Raymond Carver, people like that. And I was always reading. And I would read their stories and I go, you know what? I'm not better than this, but I can write at least as well as this, I think. So I started sending stories to Esquire magazine, which was a good place to publish at the time. And they reject them, you know, send them back. I'd say, okay, they would edit them to give me notes, and I go, I'll just write you another one. So I kept sending them. And finally, one of the editors was driving through to the Outer Banks. He says, I want to meet this crazy person who sends us a new story every week and refuses to edit his stories because he's on deadline for ship of the week, you know? So he came down and he said, if you really want to be a writer, and I think it was true at the time, that you had to move to New York. You know, New York, this was in the 80s. That was the nexus of publishing. So I started there and, published some books, became more of I was a journalist, wrote for Esquire, the New York Times, 7 Days Magazine, all those great, it was a heyday, it was the last golden days of magazine publishing, really. And then I became an academic, taught, left New York after about 10 years, and went back to the South. And I hadn't been in the South in a long time. And I went to the University of the South, Sewanee, where I was a Tennessee Williams Fellow. And there was a county nearby called Grundy County, which was like, I didn't know it, but I found out quickly, 100% white. And big KKK stronghold. If you go to swap meets there, it was all like KKK cigarette lighters, just Nazi memorabilia. You've seen these places, Jim.
Unfortunately, yes, I have.
And, it kind of struck me. I was going, man, I hadn't been in the South in, 10 or 15, 20 years, but nothing's really changed. And after that, I went to the University of Mississippi, and it was even worse in the Delta. Oxford, Mississippi is this little gem of progressive thinking and progressive people. But you go out in the Delta, it's 1950. Still. So I was shocked by all this, really. And then when I was there, I married a woman who was from LA, and we moved out here. And she was writing a biography of her father. And I met a woman in Oxford who turned out, she was in the writing program there. It turned out she was Robert Altman's script supervisor.
Oh, wow.
She never told us that in Oxford. And we got out here and we kept in touch. She said, Bob wants me to write a script for him, and I don't know how to write. And I said, Ann, your name's Ann Rapp. I said, Ann, you're a really good writer. This shouldn't be hard. She said, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I'll help you break it out at least. I don't know how to write screenwriting either. Excuse me. So we broke it out. She wrote the script. Altman made the film. It was called Cookie's Fortune. And she said, I can't pay you. I can't give you credit, but I can introduce you to Bob. I was going, introduce me to Bob, Robert Altman, one of my heroes of all time. So I went to meet Bob, and he was in his office in Santa Monica, having a margarita in the afternoon, maybe a little weed in the air, whatever. And one of his assistants had read my first book of short stories called The Ice at the Bottom of the World. And there's a story in there about a sea captain who comes home to die. It's a large ensemble cast, strong female leads. And she said, she gave it to Altman and said, this would be a good film. So he read it. And he told me, he said, this could be a good script for me. I like this story. So I went back. My wife and I were living in a cottage in Palos Verdes. No money. We'd been married about a year. She was pregnant. So I went to the library and just got all those, remember VHS cassettes. I found the ones that I could find in the library with a matching script. So I would go home and watch the film and then read the script. And so that's how I taught myself how to write. So I adapted my story. It was like 140-page script, which is a tiny bit long, and I bring it in there like this. And Altman read it. He said, Mark, this is really good, and it'll probably be my next film. But you got to remember, you got to leave something for the director and the actors to do. I went, great. I'm off to the race. This Hollywood is easy, man. So then, unfortunately, he died. So which was just, on so many levels, what a shock. But the script started getting around.
Wait a minute. Because Altman died before the Blacklist did come out, really, I thought. So years later it made the Blacklist?
I don't remember it, but I know that it was on one of those lists of things to read.
Right.
So I don't know. I can't remember.
It was probably on a list of best unproduced screenplays.
Something like that. Yeah. I'm probably mixing up it was a long time ago. So, but I got an agent off of it, and I went back to Arizona State, was teaching, and I got a call from some producers who wanted me to write for TV, and I'd never written for TV before. It was Chris Kaiser and Amy Littman had a show called Party of Five.
Right, I was going to ask about that because that's your first produced credit.
It was, and I just had my hip replaced. I was in the hospital. I was all drugged up. I took the call, and I was just like, I thought it was a half-hour sitcom set in a Jamaican diner. That's how stupid I was. So I said, no, I don't want to do this. I hung up. Fortunately, my surgical nurse was in the room, and she's going, that's one of my favorite shows. And she said, you're going to that interview. So my wife went and got this khaki suit. It's the only suit I had.
See, kids, don't do drugs because you might miss that one phone call.
You might miss that one. And I was still heavily narcotic, and the surgical nurse said, here's some crutches. I'll show you how to use them. And they put me on an airplane, took me in a rented ambulance, took me to Southwest Airlines, flew me out here. I had the meeting, which I had no memory of. I remember I sweat completely through the khaki. The khaki suit is not something to sweat. I mean, it's kind of obvious when you sweat completely through a khaki suit.
Right.
And, but I got the job. Chris and Amy were very, they're literate people. They're the type of people who they want a published author or they want one of those types of writers in the room, even if they don't have an experience, just for ideas or whatever. So I started doing that. Kind of gave up on academia. I thought what they were offering me the weekly salary that I thought they were talking about was what I was going to make in a semester, at ASU. So I said, dang, so that's kind of how I got started. It's kind of a twisted tale.
Well, so, just briefly, this is eye-opening for you, and I got to go back for a second. What is the status of the screenplay that Altman liked? Is it still banging around out there? Could it one day be made?
It's a great question. It banged around for years. I think almost every director who was current at the time saw it. In fact, Alan Pacula, he had it in his car when he was killed on the LIE.
Oh my God!
He was going to do it. Jay Russell was going to do it. Ultimately, we had so many people who were going to do it. Stephen Frears.
Wow.
Then Charlize Theron bought it, and I went around with her for, several months trying to set it up. And I began to realize that a lot of these guys just wanted to meet Charlize, frankly,
Yeah.
And then we got Kim Pierce on board at one point. Then there were some falling outs, and I don't know. And then, it's still, Charlize still has it. People ask me about it. But for me personally, I think that there's certain works that you do that you can burn out. I just encourage everybody, let's just put it on the shelf. It got me where I wanted to be. It was a ticket. It was an entree to this business. I made money off of it from the sale, the options and stuff. I'm happy to move on. What I did learn, though, Jeff, is that it was one of my least successful stories in the book. And then when I wrote the screenplay, I fixed it. I was going, this is interesting to me, So I didn't mean to interrupt you. What were you going to say?
No. I was just going to say that, I published a magazine called Backstory, and we have a section called Off the Shelf of screenplays that are unproduced by writers of note that we focus on, we publish in their entirety. I think I'm going to have to talk to you about this one after the interview because that's exactly what we do.
Exactly. There's been so many incarnations. We'll
talk about it later, but tell me this, on Party of Five, what what was your most eye-opening moment? Because here you are on in a writer's room, like on television, which is very tight deadlines. So you are definitely thrown into the mix. What was really eye-opening about your first television experience for you?
I had a great mentor on the show, John Romano, who was the showrunner, and I remember I turned in my first script, and it was like I've since then seen Faulkner scripts where it's just like a column of black down the middle of the page. It's all just dialogue, with no end.
Right.
I kind of turned in something similar where it's just like so many people just 5-minute things. And he wrote in the margin, he went, "This is gorgeous, beautiful writing. Now make it worse."
That's a hilarious note. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, it was great. And John, I learned a lot from him. There was an actor who wouldn't come out of his trailer. John would come down to my office. I had this shitty office, and he would come down and go, come watch how I do this. So I learned a lot about the.
Wait. Finish that story, Bart. Come on. How did he get the actor out of the trailer? You don't have to name names, but what did he do to coax the actor out of the trailer?
He asked the actor if he wanted to be in a coma. It's that old trick. He said, "You know what? How about you have a head injury and you're in a coma, and then you're in the bed under the hot lights, and you can't sit, and people come and talk to you, and you're just like in a coma, and maybe for the rest of the season you're in a coma." And I thought that was pretty good,
That's great because it's not a physical threat of violence; it's a writing threat of violence of what will happen to your character if you don't leave your trailer. I absolutely love it.
Come out of the writer's room legitimately,
All right. Well, so we have so much to discuss with the good Lord Bird, but I just have one other question because I know that recently you've done a lot of other TV writing, and you worked on the last season of The Man in the High Castle. And I actually really respected that anyone tried to do an adaptation of that. I'm a longtime Philip K. Dick fan, and I'm just curious. And if you haven't seen it or if you're in the middle of it for some reason, it came out in 2019, but press pause for a second or skip forward about 2 minutes because I'm going to talk about a spoiler. I'm curious if in the last season you guys ever considered this one element in which Philip K. Dick in real life was really troubled writing The Man in the High Castle because he said it brought his mind to dark places, especially being in the places of the Nazi occupiers of the United States. Not so much the Japanese forces, but it was dark for him as well because they're occupying the United States. And he the book won a Nebula Award, and it was very prestigious. And he was thinking about doing a sequel. And he actually wrote the first chapter of the sequel, which has been published in one of the books of Philip K. Dick's notes and letters. And I was curious if the show ever entertained that idea in which basically they realized that there could be an alternate universe, the Nazis. They realized there could be an alternate universe where the United States wins World War II. And they're just scared of that idea. And they think they've figured out a way to break through to that universe. And their goal is to go arm their fellow Nazi comrades so that they could win World War II, basically in our universe. And that's the opening chapter. And he decided that concept was so dark that he was never going to go anywhere with it. And my curiosity for the show, sorry about this long-winded question, was towards the end, was that ever discussed as a way to keep the show going? Because it was actually what Philip K. Dick was going to try and do.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that.
Okay.
I think that when I came on the last season, they'd kind of blown out the writers' room. There was like maybe one or two other people who'd been on the show from the beginning, who were lifesavers because I was one of the bagman writers on that show. We had no idea where they were going, and neither did they in some ways. So, and they gave us the history. I think there was a sense of urgency on that show in the final season to wrap it up. Okay. Because it had gotten so diffuse and amorphous that we needed to get to the end of the story. And it was a lot of fatigue on that show. I mean, it's a very expensive show. And it was dark. I mean, I know we shot up in Vancouver. And I'd go up there for, you know, my episode, and I'd go to the cafeteria, and you see all these guys in Nazi uniforms. I got to tell you, it's creepy. It is so creepy. Yeah. You know, just the whole thing was just spooky. So I think there was a sense to let's finalize this show. I never heard any discussions. It could have been over my head.
Sure.
Of second season.
No, that's fascinating. They really nailed kind of the concept, though, for sure, of what would America look like taken over like Germany post World War II, occupied half by the Japanese and half by Germany, with kind of that middle line being pushed by both sides in their Cold War. So, you know, they definitely accomplished that. All right. Well, so getting to today's film, which is today's TV show, which is WGA nominated. When did you first come aware of The Good Lord Bird, James McBride's book?
A fellow named Jeremy Gold at Blumhouse had worked. He and I had worked together for 5 years when I was like kind of head writer of Hell on Wheels. And you know, I love westerns. I love morality tales, especially complicated morality tales. And Jeremy Gold sent the book to me, and I read it in a Sunday afternoon. I read it, and then Monday I called him up and I said, "So what's the deal with this book? I would love to be in." He said, "Well, you know, Jeremy's going, well, just happenstance. Ethan Hawke has it, and he's coming into town, I think, the next weekend." So we had a brunch that went all afternoon. We got along really well, which is another weird story because we had to have our psychological profiles made for diversity, and they matched. It was like we were like two different versions of the same person, which kind of flipped his wife out. I'll tell you, we can talk about that. Anyway, Ethan had such passion for it. And it resounded with me because of the issues of race growing up in a small southern town that was either black or white. And, you know, my parents were mixed. So it was not, you know, I was on the outside sort of looking.
All right, so now we're going to do a quick once-over and see if there's any details we missed. If there's not, we're going to apply some washes. And while this is happening, I'm going to go ahead and touch up these eyes on these guys. Looks pretty good. Pretty good. All right, on this Demacron, two guys have flesh. I don't know if I want to wash that or not. Guess I should. Maybe. I feel like if I do wash it, it needs to be something like a purple flesh, kind of. Where are you at? And yeah, these two. Okay. That fits right. perfect. Very good. Cool. I don't suppose this would work on these. Actually, it'll work just fine. It's kind of berry color. Okay.
Outside looking in at the stuff, which is good for a writer, but it took us a long time to be accepted in the community. His passion for it and the source material was extraordinary. And then he said, "You got to meet James McBride." So I went up to New York, and Ethan was.
And Mark, just to clarify, at this point, Ethan Hawke owned the rights, and he was looking for someone to partner with.
Right.
He had an option. Okay.
I think they'd met, writers and everything. I mean, I wasn't.
But it was Ethan Hawke that had the option, not Blumhouse.
Ethan. I think Ethan had it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
But just know that Blumhouse is run by Jason Blum, who is Ethan's old buddy from college days. They've had theater together, so I think it was like Ethan had that Jason was going to help him get it.
I did not know that connection. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. I mean, Jason was kind of fearless in this regard. So Ethan was starring in True West at that time. It was like a couple of years ago. So I came up to see him, had a house seat. Guy comes and sits next to me, and we start talking. Of course, it's James McBride. It's a blind date that, Ethan has arranged. So the three of us go out afterwards, and then we get along like a house on fire. We go bar hopping around the bars that are in, this is pre-COVID in New York. And we just had a lot in common, James and I did. His mom is from a little town 30 miles from where I grew up. And we were both active in small black churches. I'm a deacon in a small black church in my town. He's a deacon in in a small black church in Brooklyn. So we know the dramas of, it's like James says. He says, there's more fun and action in a church, in a black church, than in a bar. And it's true. I mean, it's lively. There's drama. There's all sorts of intrigue and stuff like that. So that's how I got involved in it. And then Ethan and I sat down and, had to do the hard work of doing the format doc, breaking the book down into sections. I mean, James was an EP, but it was us.
Right, and I'll get there in a second. I just want to talk about something that's a trend that's been going on that I think really made room for this. There's been a trend lately, especially, and by lately I mean like the last 5 or 6 years, of taking historical dramas and giving them a modern edge while still staying very valid within history, but changing the dialogue a little. Movies like The Favorite certainly opened up the path for that. And then even something, honestly, like I, Tonya, which, shouldn't have been the masterpiece that it was, but I, Tonya really showed you what you could do with a biopic, right? Like it restructured that in a way. And obviously TV's The Great recently, which came out, when you guys came out, same thing, was influenced by The Favorite. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that, about kind of doing a historical drama that is self-aware in a modern perspective.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good distinction, Jeff, because what we had to convince the studio and the network of, after they bought it, everybody wanted to buy it, then they bought it, they're going, oh God, what have we bought? It's not a biopic. It's not a historical documentary. It's a Huck Finn novel. It's a tall tale. And if you look at it that way, then you lose the shackles of the biopic world. This book is a story told through the lens of a young boy who has to wear a dress and is mixed race. So that now we're in a whole different realm. It's a tall tale. And that gave us a lot more freedom. But then the challenge was two things. The tone, you had to have the tone because he doesn't know what he's witnessing. He's just young. And the second challenge was it's so much interior. It's an interior novel. How do you dramatize an interior? It's a ongoing problem for writers. So McBride was an anchor from which I swung, on this because I would go, dude, I'm thinking this, and he would go with God, man, just do it. So I don't ever felt like we were, as long as we remembered that Onion was the main character and we were telling it through his eyes, we were okay. And people go, well, how do we know that? And I go, well, the voiceover is a clue.
Right. The voiceover is definitely a clue. And we'll get to your writing process in a second, but let's talk about Onion for a second. Tell us what the historical significance of Onion was and your decision, obviously, to translate that from the book. Because as you just said, what's perfect about this is that Onion is a fish out of water character coming into this new world of John Brown. So the audience is able to easily identify with a protagonist like that. They have a way into the world, and they kind of only know what Onion knows. And they only become an expert as Onion becomes an expert in John Brown's world. So there's a lot of good reasons to have that concept if you're going to do a movie about somebody, as explosive and wild as John Brown. Taking a character on the sidelines and making them the protagonist is a great way to experience the world. What else could you tell us about Onion, historically, factual, etc.?
That's probably a better question for James, but I think that Onion emblemized for me when I was working on his character, and I had long conversations with James about this. One of the first things that I noticed in the book was that the black characters in the book immediately recognized him as a boy in a dress.
Right, I was going to talk about that later.
And the white people just thought he was like a girl in a dirty dress. Significant to me because that told me that black people understood the struggle that every black person had to endure to live their life day by day. And if you have to wear a dress, wear a dress. White people see him as a non-person, see him as property. If it's wearing a dress, it must be a girl. And that helped me, the perspective of both the races helped me, develop Onion as a character. And he doesn't know. He's very ignorant of the world. He's innocent. And that was part of the fun, was just like revealing the world to him. And often the stuff that's being revealed to him is wrong, or just inaccurate. So I don't know. It's a character construct. That's a good McBride question, I guess. I don't know. I think it's genius.
Did you do any historical research on the character of Onion? Because there was a real person, correct?
I think that there were several. I mean,
or is it a composite?
People, yeah. I think James had some. James did tons of research. There have been people all along who've either passed for a boy or passed as a girl. I think he pulled some of that out. I mean, he's a tenacious researcher, so I wouldn't be surprised. We didn't have a conversation about it per se because we were under the gun, man. They told us like in March to start shooting in June, and we had no. Yeah, it's like so. It wasn't like we could have a lot of leisurely conversations about these things. We just had to hit the ground running.
Well, I mean, even if it's a fictional device completely, Onion is a great way into the world, and you could use composites, and it's hilarious because I mean, right off in your pilot, it gets that tone in which nobody tells John Brown he's wrong, and when John Brown asks Henry what's his name, and would he come with him, he says Henry Ann, and like as he says Henry Ann, like John Brown cuts him off and starts calling him a girl because he thinks he said Henrietta.
Right.
So it's just funny that. He perpetuates that. Let's talk about your writing process for a second. The craft of adaptation is difficult, as you said, taking internal voices and externalizing them. Tell us about that process of sitting down with Ethan Hawke to get through the book, because I know that you co-created the show. I know that Ethan did some writing on the show, obviously as well, and he knew he was going to be the protagonist. I'd interviewed Ethan before about his writing for the Before Midnight movies, and obviously The Hottest State, which he wrote and directed. So I know Ethan takes writing very seriously. Tell us about your collaboration with breaking down the book into a 7-part TV series.
Well, we came at it from different angles, which was great. I mean, we both read everything we could find about John Brown, every book. But Ethan he took a step further. He went up to Lake Placid. He visited the John Brown homesteads. He retraced some of the steps. And then I read everything I could read, and we traded books back and forth, and I mean, even obscure little journals that cost $165 I ordered on that, so we became John Brown scholars, if you can, we can say that. And I think our first meetings, we were just trying to figure out what we're doing. What are we saying? We love the book. How does the book work? Why is the book working? How does McBride use humor? Why do we care about this? Is it important? Is this an important work? Does it have, relevance? And it obviously did. We can talk about that.
Okay. So I'm going to take a quick break, stretch my legs, and then I guess come back and wrap this up.